Good afternoon and welcome to the Word Revealed. I'm your host and teacher, Marquita Brooks, and we are in month 10 and we're going into week 2. Now, of course, for month 10, we know the topic is before the coming of the King because there's some things that have to happen before the King himself shows up. There's some responsibility that we have in order to prepare for and establish his kingdom in the earth. And so this week, week 2, we're looking at the topic coming into kingdom authority. God is bringing us into kingdom authority. It's very important that we understand it and we walk in it in accordance with his will and ways. Here's the focus. As God brings us into true kingdom authority, there are things we must learn while in the process. Each lesson is essential in establishing his kingdom. Now, of course, we started in First Samuel. We've been looking at Samuel, and then we've been looking at Saul's reign, which is about to come to an end. In this particular chapter, we're going to look at starting First Samuel chapter 31. But we're going to be looking at David's reign. We're going to really be going into David's reign, and so I'm going to introduce First Chronicles now. So we'll be reading First and Second Samuel as they connect with First Chronicles, which is a beautiful overlap of scripture because there are things that are in Chronicles that are not in the books of Samuel. Additionally, we'll be overlapping those with the Psalms because there are some things in the Psalms that are not in First and Second Samuel or First and Second Chronicles that we want to keep in mind as David kind of, he wrote those Psalms himself, and there's a few things in there that give us a little more insight into his situation, which is very helpful for us because David is a wonderful example, a wonderful model of a human whose heart was after the Lord's and who pleased the Lord and really established, kingdom authority. He really advanced the kingdom of God and blessed God and always put God first. And even when he sinned, he repented. And so he's an example for us. And so I love looking at David. I'm excited we're going to be looking at David and overlapping these scriptures so you can really see a big picture of what it looked like, David coming into the kingship, David operating as king. We'll see the same thing with Solomon and all the other kings as we overlap the books of First, Second Samuel, First and Second Kings with First and Second Chronicles. And so all this is going to come together. You're going to see it pretty clearly. We're also still in the book of Revelation because we're looking at the establishment of the kingdom prior to Messiah's return. And so this is so important as we've got all these scriptures overlapping in the times that we're in right now, preparing for our Messiah's return, that we're really getting an understanding what God is trying to reveal to us so that we can be in position going forward. And so let's get started. Let's look at this first day. And the topic is the bittersweet moves of God, the bittersweet moves of God. And I know, all too personally what that feels like. Like at the same time when God is just really blessing the ministry and the business, of course, my stepdaughter dies. And so there's this bittersweetness of serving God, of advancing his kingdom, of moving by the power of his spirit, because there's the warfare against the enemy, there's discipline that comes from God also. And there are things that God has to do in order to establish his kingdom that don't always feel good. But then there's also the victories that come with serving God. And all of that is happening at the same time. And so it's so important that we understand that, serving God and being his servant, advancing his kingdom can be bittersweet. We're going to see things that are pleasant and pleasurable. And then we're going to see things that are heartbreaking and very challenging. And all of this is happening simultaneously as we're doing the work of the Lord. And this is why it's so important that we are filled with the Holy Spirit so that we have discernment. Because if something is pleasant, oftentimes we think it's good and it's of God. And that's not always true. Pleasant things can be of the enemy. Pleasant things can be distractions. As to what challenging and heartbreaking things can be of God. And our emotions, whether or not it positively or pleasantly affects us, cannot be the judge of whether or not something is from God or whether it's good. Only God can let us know whether it's from him or whether it's good or not. And so we've got to be in contact with him, be in connection with him to discern where he is at work and where the enemy is at work, because things don't always look clear to us, and we don't always have a clear compass as to what's God and what is not God. And so we've got to be talking to the Lord, listening to him, and allowing him to reveal it to us. And so here we are in 1 Samuel chapter 31. We will remember, of course, the last thing that we looked at in these previous chapters. Saul had gone to see a medium because he wasn't sure what was going to happen in this battle with the Philistines, because God was not speaking to him. And then the medium brought up Samuel, and Samuel said, tomorrow you're going to die, be with me. If you did not watch that particular God Speaks, please, that particular Word Revealed, go back and watch that one from last week. There's some very important spiritual truths that I shared during that particular Word Revealed, which was month 10, week 1. And the topic was sustained faith in tribulation. Then we also see David and his family being attacked in Ziklag, which was the town that the Philistine king gave him as he was hiding out in Philistia from Saul. But his family gets attacked, and all of his men's families get attacked. The city is burned down. His families and their children and everything they own is taken captive by these Amalekites while he is with the Philistine army. And then they have to go back and rescue their families. And so on the heels of that, while David is doing that, the Philistines are coming and they're attacking Israel. And what's happening is, remember, David is hiding out in Philistine territory. And because he was hiding from Saul, because he knew Saul was not going to come into Philistine territory to look for him. Saul searched all over Israel for David, but he was not about to go into Philistia to look for him because he wanted to start a war with the Philistines. David knew Saul was afraid of the Philistines. David, of course, was not afraid of the Philistines, which is why we see, of course, he killed Goliath. But he goes into the Philistine territory and asks the king to allow him and his men to have safe harbor there. And he finds favor with the king. The king brings David into Philistia, so Saul stops hunting from him. But now the Philistines are coming against Israel. So the Philistines are coming against Israel. David has told the Philistine king that he would fight on his side against Israel. But then the Philistine commanders say, no, we don't trust David, send him back home. Saul is inquiring of God. God is not answering him. So he goes to the medium, and the medium brings up Samuel. Samuel says, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. So Saul now is preparing for war, knowing he's going to die, knowing that he and his sons are going to die in this battle against the Philistines. David has now been sent back from the battle lines by the Philistine chiefs, only to find his family having been taken captive, and everything he owns taken captive. So he's fighting for his family while the Philistines and the Israelites are at war with each other. And David is going and trying to get his family and the families of his men back from the Amalekites. So all of this is happening at the same time. We want to kind of catch you up and give you the framework so when we read these chapters, you understand all that has been going on. So here we are in 1 Samuel chapter 31, which is the last chapter of this particular book, 1 Samuel. And again, the topic for the day is the bittersweet moves of God. And so what we see here in 1 Samuel chapter 31 is that the Philistines press their attack against Israel. And then Saul is injured. King Saul is injured by an archer. So an arrow pierces him, probably hits some type of vital organ. He asked his armor bearer to run him through with the sword because he didn't want the Philistines to come and finish him off. His armor bearer is too afraid to do it. So Saul falls on his own sword. In verse 5, we see that. And then his armor bearer does the same thing. His armor bearer falls on his sword as well. Now, of course, we know an armor bearer would have been a young soldier who literally was like, was very close to the soldier that he was carrying armor for. And he would go in front of that soldier and carry his shield. Now, the thing that we tend to think of as a shield is really a buckler. It's about this big and just covers like your head and your chest. But an actual shield was much bigger. It would almost cover your whole body. And so the armor bearer is going in front of the soldier with this huge shield to cover the body of himself and the soldier behind him, where the soldier jumps out and does the fighting. And so the armor bearer could be in front carrying the armor while the soldier's in back fighting, or the soldier's in front fighting. The armor bearer might just cover his back with the shield. Additionally, armor bearers would fight alongside soldiers, like we saw happening with Jonathan and his armor bearer earlier, where the soldier's fighting in one direction, the armor bearer has his back and he's fighting the other direction. The whole point of the armor bearer is to make sure that the soldier does not get hurt or killed. And so this is going to be a close person to the soldier. And of course, this soldier here we're talking about is the king. Saul is the king at the time. And his armor bearer, he asked him now to kill him with his sword. And the armor bearer is like, I don't want to strike you. I can't strike you. So Saul falls on his own sword. His armor bearer does the exact same thing. Now Saul is dead. Now, when they come, the Philistines come upon on the scene, they realize that Saul is dead, but also his 3 sons are dead as well. Now, these are not all of his sons. These are his oldest sons. So Jonathan, which was the best friend of David, Abinadab, and Malchishua, they're all dead on this Mount Gilboa where the fighting took place. And so, they would have been the three ones in line as king: Jonathan first, then Abinadab and Malchishua, but they're all dead now. Saul's also dead, only leaving him one son, which is a younger son, which we'll see in a minute. And so now, basically, Saul's kingdom now, his kingship, his reign has come to an end on this mountain for the most part. We'll see a little bit of remnants of it in a minute, but for the most part, it has now come to an end. And the Philistines strip their armor, they take all their stuff, and they put it in the temple of their God. And it also talks about the fact that they cut off Saul's head, and they take Saul's head with them as well. And they put all this stuff in the temple of their God. But then the people of Jabesh Gilead come and they get Saul's body and the bodies of his three sons, and they come and they bury them under the Hamish tree in Jabesh, and they're from Jabesh Gilead. And they fasted for 7 days. And so they mourn for Saul. And the reason, this is bittersweet is because we know Saul was wicked. He was a wicked, wicked king. But his sons weren't wicked. And we see this as a defeat for Israel. And so it had to happen. And that the Lord had to remove Saul in order to bring in David. He had to remove Saul in order to, put an end to Saul's evil reign. But it's still bitter because Israel has a loss. Other Israelite soldiers die in order for David to come into the kingdom. Now I'm going to go to the book of First Chronicles because we're going to see this account again. Now, the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles is actually the lineage of Israelites who are returning back from exile in Babylon, because that's when First Chronicles was written. Though it's going to actually go through the reign of David and all of the kings of Judah, it was written Babylonian exile. And the whole point of First and Second Chronicles being written was so that the exiles coming back out of Babylon would understand the nation as it had been and be able to rebuild the kingdom. They were trying to rebuild the nation, rebuild the temple, reestablish worship, reestablish order in their government. And so it was important that they had these chronicles that gave insight into what the kingdom of Judah looked like before going into exile. And so the focus in First Chronicles is on Judah, as to where we're going to see that in First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, the focus is on the entire nation of Israel, which is why it's nice to read them, together, because they fill in gaps for each other. Now, the first 9 chapters of First Chronicles we're going to read later, because again, these 9 chapters are about the exiles that return back to the land and all of their genealogies, who they came from, who their ancestors were, all that stuff. We're going to read that when we get to the portion about the Babylonian exile and the return. And so we'll come back to these first 9 chapters of First Chronicles. But I want you to start in First Chronicles chapter 10, because here they stop with the genealogies and they go into history. And they start with this battle on Mount Gilboa where Saul takes his life. So the very things you just saw in 1 Samuel chapter 31 are showing up here in 1 Chronicles chapter 10, where we see the Philistines pressing the attack. Is very similar language, in which case the record from 1 and 2 Samuel may have been what was used to actually write 1 Chronicles. And of course, there were other sources as well. You can see a few things here that are not in 1 and 2 Samuel, but you're going to hear a lot of the same language. So probably the books of 1 and 2 Samuel were referenced when they were writing 1 and 2 Chronicles. And so it talks about the same exact thing: the Philistines pursuing Saul, killing him, his 3 sons, Saul being wounded by archers, asking his armor bearer to run him through, but his armor bearer wouldn't do it. So Saul falls on his own sword. His armor bearer falls on his sword, and then they all die together. Then it says the Israelites in the valley saw that the army was fleeing, and so they start to abandon their positions and go back home. And so the army starts to scatter. The Israelite army starts to scatter. The Philistines come and strip the dead, like of course we read that before. They take Saul's head and his armor and all of that to Philistine territory, and carry the news to their idols and put it in the temple of their God. And it says particularly that they fastened Saul's skull to the temple of Dagon. Like Saul's skull was fastened to the temple of Dagon. And then of course the people of Jabesh Gilead come and get Saul's body and the bodies of his sons, and they buried them. And in this account it says under the pistachio tree in Jabesh, and they fast for 7 days. And so we see a very similar account that happens here. It sounds almost exactly the same of what happens in order to bring Saul out of the kingship. But there's an additional little commentary added because remember, Chronicles is being written to the children of Israel, particularly the nation of Judah, the southern kingdom that's coming back out of exile in Babylon. So the whole point is to make sure they establish a kingdom that is acceptable in God's sight, where they can retain the favor of Yahweh. And so this is added. This part is not in 1 Samuel chapter 31, these verses 13 and 14. So listen to this. So Shaul, or Saul, died for the transgression he committed against Adonai, because of the word of Adonai that he did not keep, and because he sought the counsel of the spirit, and that's of course of the medium, instead of consulting Adonai. Therefore Adonai put him to death and turned the rulership over to David, the son of Yishai, or Jesse. And so it's giving us a segue, because from this point forward, we're focusing on David's kingship. We're focusing on David being king, how he established the nation, how he ruled his kingdom, because they want to reestablish the kingship according to the way David had established it. So that is 1 Chronicles chapter 10. Now we want to go back and we want to look at 2 Samuel chapter 1. 2 Samuel chapter 1 it has a whole nother account that is, you're not going to find it in Chronicles. It's not in 1 Chronicles at all. But here in 2 Samuel 1, we're going to see what happens when David finds out that Saul, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Melchishua are all dead. And so this is what happens. So in 2 Samuel chapter 1, we see, of course, David had been 2 days in Ziklag after he slaughtered the Amalekites. So they were, their families were regrouping. They got to rebuild homes and tents and stuff like that because the Amalekites had burned down everything. So on the third day, someone came from Saul's camp with his clothes torn, and he falls before David on the ground. So apparently everybody knew where David was in Ziklag. And David asked him, where you come from? And he said, I've escaped from the camp of Israel. And David said, how are things going in the battle? This is the young man's answer in verse 4. The people have fled the battle, and many of them are wounded or dead. Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead too. Now, of course, this young man knows that that's who David cares about is Jonathan. And so he tells him King Saul is dead, which is very important because everybody knew David was supposed to be the next king. He tells him Jonathan, his best friend, is dead. Of course, we also know Abinadab and Melchishua are dead, but they're not mentioned here. Now, David asked the young man, how do you know that Saul and Jonathan are dead? And this is a very wise question. It's a very wise question. He doesn't just receive this information. He wants to know the vantage point of this young man. He wants to know, is this young man's account to be trusted, and if he is in fact loyal to Israel? Very important question that David asks. It's a leadership question, something that everybody might not have thought to ask. And this is what the young man said. Verse 6, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa when I saw Saul leaning on his spear. Remember I told you he fell on his sword. The chariots and cavalry were bearing down upon him. He's actually leaning on his spear because he's leaning over. He looked behind him, saw me, and called to me. Now watch this. This is not the armor bearer, because the armor bearer is dead. He's a whole different young man. Called to me, and I answered, here I am. He said to me, who are you? I said, I'm an Amalekite. So this young man is an Amalekite. He's not an Israelite. Now watch this. He said to me, I'm in agony, and I'm going, but I'm still alive. So please stand next to me and kill me. So I stood next to him and killed him because I was sure he was so badly wounded that he couldn't live. I took the crown that was on his head and the bracelet on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord. Now, this is very interesting because both 1 Samuel chapter 31 and 1 Chronicles chapter 10 tells us that Saul fell on his own sword, and that his armor bearer also fell on his own sword, and that Saul had asked the armor bearer to run him through. Now, it's very interesting because clearly this Amalekite is lying. Now, remember, David has just come from rescuing his family from Amalekites. Okay, so these guys, it's pretty clear they can't be trusted. They're marauders. They're raiders. They steal stuff. They're scavengers. So what clearly has happened? So this is why David would ask them, "How do you know that they're dead?" See, he's trying to find out what's going on with this guy. Okay. So this Amalekite was basically raiding the camp, is what was happening. He sees two nations fighting each other. And then people start scattering. He notices the king is dead. He goes, oh, opportunity. Let me go get the crown, because the Philistines were going to show up. It says, of course, the Philistines showed up, cut Saul's head off, took his head, took all his stuff, took all the stuff of his sons, and they took it back to the temple. But this Amalekite had apparently beaten them there. And not only had he beaten them there, he was probably there the whole time. He said he saw Saul leaning on his spear, and Saul had asked him to run him through. So he probably heard Saul ask his armor bearer. See, because most lies have some truth in them. This is why they're effective. Okay. So he is now taking a true account, but he put himself in it when he was probably just on an onlooker looking for opportunity to rob somebody. He's watching this account of what really happened, but he's lying to David about how it happened. He's telling David, I'm the one that killed Saul, and I brought his crown and his bracelet to you. And this young man is thinking David's going to give him some handsome reward for it. Like, that's the reason for the lie, because he knows that Saul was chasing David down this whole time. Everybody in the whole land knows that Saul's been hunting David down. And so in his mind, in the Amalekite's mind, he's thinking, well, David's going to be happy that Saul is dead. And he's going to be happy that I'm bringing him Saul's crown. And he's going to give me some type of reward for this. This is what this young man is thinking. And David is not that type of person. Remember, this is bittersweet. Yes, he knows God is about to establish him as king, but his best friend Jonathan is dead. And as much as he wanted Saul to chasing him, David would not lay a hand on Saul. And so he's not in a position where he's like, oh, I'm so glad Saul is dead. Let me do a little dance. That is not at all where David is, because he's a man of honor. And as a man of honor, he is not happy that Saul is dead. He's not happy that he's certainly not happy that Jonathan is dead. And this young man, to say that he's the one who ran Saul through, he's thinking he's going to get a reward from David, but he doesn't really know David. He's an Amalekite. He's not an Israelite. He's not from Judah. He does not really know David, because this is what happens. David took hold of his clothes. He tore his clothes and went into mourning. He wailed and cried for Saul and for Jonathan, because now he knows that they have died, because this young man brought the crown and the armband on Saul's arm, which David had seen many, many times. He knew that that's what that was. But this is what he says. It says to the young man who told him, where are you from? And he said, I'm a foreigner, an Amalekite. And David said, how is it that you weren't afraid to raise your hand to destroy Adonai's anointed? So he's like, so how did you think it was okay for you to kill Saul? And the armor bearer even knew, that's not something I should do. I'm not supposed to kill you. Like, the armor bearer knew it. So Saul had to kill himself, because he wanted to die before the Philistines got there, because the Philistines would have killed him. He didn't want that. He also knew that they would torture people, because you remember what they did to Samson. They put his eyes out. They made him dance stuff in front of everybody. So Saul knew that they would make sport of him. And so this is why he kills himself, and he asks his armor bearer to do it. But this young man has lied to David about killing Saul, but for that very lie, because he's saying he did it, now David's calling him to account. And so he says, David called one of his young men and said, go over to him and kill him. And that young man, one of his warriors, struck that man down, and he died. And David said to him as he was dying, your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth convicted you when you said, I killed Adonai's anointed. And it's so interesting, because David is such a good man. We see that David he's not rejoicing that Saul has died. He actually creates a lament, a song of mourning and woe, about not just about Jonathan, who everybody knows was a righteous man and was David's best friend, but it's also about Saul. And he really cries for Saul and laments and mourns for Saul, because that is what was supposed to happen. He was the king of the land. And it's the honorable memorial that should happen for Saul. So he literally, it's like he organizes a memorial for Saul, and he starts to write this lament for Saul about the way he died and about what has happened to him. And the scripture tells us here that it's written in the book of Jasher. And Jasher is one of the books that is in the Apocrypha. And there's so many things in the book of Jasher, like a lot about Exodus, all types of stuff in the book of Jasher that did not make it into our canonized Bible. Again, that's part of the Apocrypha. It's not something I tell people you should go and read, because you really need a strong foundation in the scripture before you read anything in the Apocrypha, because you got to discern what's God and what may not be. Because there's a reason those books were not canonized. There's a reason they did not make it into our canonized Bible. And so there's got to be a strong, strong scriptural foundation before you start reading books in the Apocrypha. So I don't tell people, oh, you should go read this and you should go read that. Sometimes I make reference to it, and the scripture itself even makes reference to it. But unless you know these scriptures backwards and forward and have a very strong foundation in the Word of God, I wouldn't say go and look for them. You need to know the Word first, because this is what you need for life and godliness. That is additional reading, which can fill in some gaps, which is great for an avid Bible reader. If you're not an avid Bible reader, don't start reading the Apocrypha. Make sure that the Bible is a part of your daily ritual. You're always reading the scriptures that there are scriptures that you know backwards and forward, because the word is in your soul. Then you can start to read things in the Apocrypha, because you have a great discernment, because the word is the same. And so the lament is actually written here, where he talks about how Saul and Jonathan fell, and that they were together even in death, and that the wicked came and destroyed them, and he just laments and laments and laments. He calls them heroes, and he grieves for Jonathan, his brother. He's just a beautiful, beautiful lament that David puts together here, that he shares with the whole nation, calling the nation to mourn for Saul, which is very, very important. It's important that he did that, because oftentimes new leaders will not allow people to lament the previous leader. A lot of times they don't want people to mourn for the previous leader. They don't want to honor the previous leader, because they really feel like they're taking over for that person's place. But David doesn't have that type of control or power mentality. He knows that God is the one who establishes kings, and God is the one who takes them down. And so David knows if God removed Saul, my job is now to mourn with those who mourn. His family is mourning, the nation is mourning. David is to, not only should David mourn, but David should lead the mourning, and that's exactly what he's doing. And so it's sweet in that David knows that his kingship is about to be established, but it's bitter in that he is leading a nation that is mourning right now. And that's so interesting, because like I said, I'm at a very season right now. I'm in mourning, but also God is doing some amazing things in his kingdom. And I'm a part of all of that. Very, very bittersweet. And many of us are experiencing that. Like every time I open up Facebook, somebody's family member has died or is really, really ill and is asking for prayer. I mean, every time I go on Facebook, I'm in text messages, emails, like everybody's being affected by what's happening in the world right now. There is no one whose family has not been affected by illness or death because of what is happening in the world. And so it's important that we have the right mindset, which is what we see David having. He has the right mindset. He's mourning with those who mourn, but he's also preparing his heart for the things that God is doing. And we've got to be able to do both. And only the Holy Spirit can empower us to do that. It's not something we can do in our own strength, I'm telling you right now, because we tend to be extreme. Either we would prepare and be in denial about the mourning, or we would just stay in mourning and go into a depression and not do the preparation that we need to do for the kingdom. The Lord is actually empowering us and calling us to do both. So now let's look at Revelation. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 10, because we completed Revelation chapter 9 on the last day last week. And in Revelation chapter 10 is about an angel with a little scroll. And then the scroll itself is not, it's small because the angel is huge. That's why the scroll is so little. The angel is huge, but the scroll is it's a regular size scroll, but it's small in this huge angel's hand. And then small enough that that John can actually eat it, just like we see Ezekiel eating a scroll in the book of Ezekiel as well. It's one of the first things that the Lord does is give him a scroll to eat. And John does the very same thing we see here in Revelation chapter 10. A mighty angel comes down from heaven, dressed in a cloud with a rainbow over his head, which is so amazing. His face is like the sun. His legs are columns of fire, and he's got a little scroll lying open in his hand. Now, he is huge. He is huge. He's filling the sky, okay? He plants his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. That's how big he is. And he shouts in a loud voice like the roar of a lion. When he shouted, 7 thunderclaps sounded with voices that spoke. But when the 7 thunders spoke, John was about to write, but he heard a voice in heaven say, seal up the things the 7 thunders have said and don't write them down. So we don't know what the 7 thunders said right here. When the angel spoke, the 7 thunders spoke. We don't know what they said. And so basically, these 7 thunders are going to be proclamations from God coming out of heaven. We don't know what God said out of heaven, because his voice is always like a thunder, because John was not allowed to write it down. He just records what else is happening, because whatever the Lord spoke in the air, released in the atmosphere, as John is seeing his prophecy, is something that's coming to pass, but God does not want us to have revelation of it just yet. Now, that same angel lifts up his right hand toward heaven, and he swears by Yahweh, he swears by God, who created the heaven and the earth, and everything in it. This is what he says: there will be no more delay. In verse 6, continuing in verse 7. On the contrary, in the days of the sound from the seventh angel, when he sounds his shofar, the hidden plan of God will be brought to completion. The good news as he proclaimed it to his servants, the prophets. So we see this fearsome angel. We know God has spoken from heaven. Little teeny scroll in his angel's hand, but God's proclamations are not going to delay. Everything he's spoken is happening, is going to happen from this forward. It will be all brought to completion. The fullness of God's plan of good news, and the fullness of God's plan of salvation, redemption, deliverance, the fullness of his plan is coming to pass, which is going to be bittersweet. There's some judgment in there against the wicked, and there's some judgment in there for the righteous. There's some restoration for the righteous, but there's also some tribulation for the righteous and the wicked. Like, there's a bittersweetness to the completion of the plan of the good news. And this is important to get that, because we're in that season where these things are being fulfilled, and there's a bittersweet atmosphere around us. There's things that are pleasant and things that are tremendously unpleasant and challenging, but all of it is necessary for what God is doing. Then it says, next the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again and told him to go and take the scroll. Of course, this is the Lord speaking to him, to go and take the scroll that's in the angel's hand. So he goes over and he asks the angel for the scroll, and the angel gives it to him, and he says to him, take it and eat it. It will turn your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it will be sweet as honey. Now, the same thing happened with Ezekiel, that he ate this scroll and it was sweet to his mouth. And this is important. I'm going to actually take you there. We read this already in the book of Ezekiel. And I want to take you there. It's right at the beginning, after Ezekiel sees the Lord. In chapter 3, the Lord gives him a scroll. He says, eat the scroll that's in front of you, and then go and speak to the house of Israel. And this is so important, because the scroll, because we see it here in Ezekiel, we understand that this scroll is going to be prophecy. This is a prophetic word that's coming forth, and Ezekiel has to eat it so that he will have the words of God in his mouth that he can then share with all of the people of God. And this is exactly what's happening here with John. He's eating the scroll. Now it's interesting, because this scroll that Ezekiel's eating is one that has words of mourning, lament, and woe on it, but it's sweet as honey. It tastes sweet as honey in his mouth. And the same thing happens with John. This scroll tastes sweet as honey in his mouth. And the words of the Lord, even words of judgment, are sweet, because God's spirit is in them. It's like these things must take place. So there's a comfort and there's a shalom that comes with God's word. I have received all types of prophecies from the Lord, even prophecies about deaths of millions. Like, the reality is, in 2003, what we're seeing now with all this death, I saw it then, and I saw it getting much worse than it is now. Just dead bodies everywhere. Like, when you look at some of the videos from other nations, like in certain countries in Africa, they have been throwing their dead into the sea, and all the dead bodies are coming back on the seashore. And so, which case, you got dead bodies all across the beaches in these nations, and it's just bodies upon bodies upon bodies. In other places, they got mass graves where they're just throwing dead bodies. Like, this is a challenge. This is a real challenge for our global community. But what I've seen is even worse than that. In which case, it will get worse before it gets better. It will get worse before the Lord comes back, and that's bittersweet. The sweetness is that the Lord is coming. The bitterness is that it will get worse. And this is what you see happening here with this scroll. Is sweet to John's mouth, because it's the word of God. It's got to be sweet because it's good. Even when it's a challenging word, it's still good because it's from God. But it's bitter. It turns his stomach bitter because it's mourning. It's a word of mourning. It's a word of challenge and pain. And so it's sweet and bitter. And this is exactly what's happening in the times of David. It's sweet and bitter. It's what's happening in our time, sweet and bitter. And so he takes the scroll, he eats it in his mouth, it's sweet, but after he swallows it, it turns his stomach bitter. And he was told, you must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings. That was in verse 11. Now let's go to the second day. The topic for the second day is fighting for kingdom advancement. And so Saul is dead. David's got the crown in his hand. Doesn't mean the nation has crowned him yet. We'll see that in a minute. But he's got the crown. And John has now eaten the scroll, and he's got to continue prophesying to lots of people, knowing that God is doing things in the earth that are bittersweet. And so with this knowledge, we've got to go into the second topic the same way. We understand that the things God is doing are bittersweet, but we still have to fight for kingdom advancement. And even that is bittersweet. The fact that God would honor us enough to allow us to be in the fight is a beautiful thing. That's sweet, but it's bitter in that it is a bitter fight. And you'll see that with David as well. He goes into this bitter fight for the kingdom, which you see in 2 Samuel, but you don't see it in Chronicles. And so here in 2 Samuel, David asked the Lord, should I go up to one of the towns of Judah? Because remember, he's in Ziklag. He's in Philistine territory. Now, the Philistine king has given him that town. So Ziklag actually becomes a part of Judah once David becomes king. But he's not in Judah. He's not in what is considered Judah right now. So he asked the Lord, should I go up to one of the towns of Judah? Because remember, he's from Judah. And it's the closest place. Like, he's close to Judah in proximity, in geographic proximity. So getting there would be easy. And the Lord says, yes. And he says, which one? He says, go to Hebron. So the Lord sends him to Hebron. And when he gets there, the men of Judah come to David and they anoint him as king. So probably they used the crown that David had received from this Amalekite. In the previous chapter, we see that in 2 Samuel chapter 1. They probably put that crown on David's head in Hebron, and they crowned him king of Judah. And this was very important because they haven't talked to the other 11 tribes. This is just Judah saying he's king. In which case, in order to be king over all 12 tribes, all the 12 tribes have to agree. Right now, it's Judah that is anointing him as king. Only his own tribe is anointing him as king. It's the biggest tribe because eventually it will become its own nation by itself completely. But it is still just one of the 12 tribes. And so they anoint him as king, and they bless him. They say beautiful things to him as well. And then he sends messengers to the people of Jabesh Gilead. He sends a message to the people of Jabesh Gilead. He blesses them for bearing Saul and Saul's 3 sons because they honored the previous king. And this is such a beautiful seed David is sowing. He is becoming king in Judah, and he's blessing people who blessed the previous king. When he could have cursed them, he could have had them killed for showing favor to Saul and his sons. But and a lot of kings have done that. When they try to do this shift in regime, they actually kill or punish everybody that did anything good for or was pleasant to the previous regime. And it's not a good seed to sow. That's really the type of stuff that the enemy does. It's very destructive. David is sowing a good seed into his kingdom because he's sowing a seed of honor. He's honoring the people who honored Saul. And so he's actually really showing honor into his kingship. That his kingship was based upon honor, not fear, not murder, not power or control, but that honor would be at the foundation of his kingdom. And you're going to see that it becomes very important, the relationship that he has with all the people, which is necessary for the victories that God is going to give him through the unity that will be created through all of the 12 tribes. And that's because of the seed that he is sowing. And this is so important, and we get that because David is a wonderful example of good leadership. He's sowing the right seeds, and he himself is going to reap this fruit of honor as he goes forward. And so then we see that there's a war between what remains of the house of Saul and David. Now, like I said, this is not even in Chronicles at all. They skip all of that. They just tell us David gets crowned king, and then he started fighting some wars. Like he started fighting battles against enemy nations. The part about David fighting against Saul's youngest son, Ishbosheth, which it remained, he was not on the battlefield, which tells us that he was really young. But he's the last son of Saul. And so Abner, who was Saul's commander, that's the one that David said, you ought to die because somebody came in, you could have killed your master, and I took the spear and the dug from his head, you were asleep. It's the same guy. He takes Ishbosheth, puts Ishbosheth on the throne as Saul's only remaining son, and crowns him the king of Israel. So now there are 2 kings. There's a king of Judah, and there's a king of all the other tribes of Israel. And of course, it's not the will of Yahweh, so they start to fight. They come together because 2 men have now been crowned king, Ishbosheth, Saul's son, and David. who's wearing Saul's crown. Both of them have been crowned king. They both got an army, and they start to fight against each other. And lots of different things happen. They first they have some young men fight with knives, but they were kind of like short swords, which can give you kind of close hand to hand combat. And so they fight in this way, but then all of them die. They kill each other at the same time because they're all equally matched soldiers. So then the army just kind of starts fighting each other and chasing each other down. And Asahel, which is he is a brother of Joab. Now Joab is David's nephew, and this is so important. In verse 18, the three sons of Zeruiah were there. Zeruiah is David's sister. Okay, Zeruiah is David's sister. You won't find that out until you go through all the genealogies and chronicles. When you go through the genealogies and chronicles, you're going to find out that Zeruiah is David's sister, which means Joab, his brother Asahel, and his brother Abishai are David's nephews. So Joab becomes the leader, the commander of David's army. We're going to see that. And Abner is still the commander of what's left of Saul's army, which was the army of the nation. Joab's brother, Asahel, who is also David's nephew, runs after Abner. Now, Abner is a better fighter. He's a much more experienced fighter. He led Saul's army, but Asahel is faster. He's young and he's faster. He's fleet-footed like a deer. So he's running after Abner. Abner's like, look, boy, you better stop chasing me. I'm going to have to kill you. And then your brother's going to be mad. And then this war is going to get even uglier. And Asahel's like, no, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to kill you. Because, see, they know Abner put Ishbosheth on the throne. So they're like, we got to get rid of Abner, because he's the one that's pushing for Saul's house to still remain in power. So we're going to get rid of Abner. So Asahel keeps tracking him down. Abner turns around and gets Asahel with the spear, and he dies. This is Joab's brother, again, David's nephew. Joab goes crazy. He's so angry here. It's very important. It's important that this is happening, because you're going to see later that this is very important. Abner is so upset that Asahel has been killed, but they're killed in battle. He's really angry with Abner at this point. And Abner tries to just talk to Joab and like, look, we need to squash this. We need to stop, because all our men are just dying, because they're brethren. They're all from one nation and trained similarly. He's like, we just need to stop this. Nobody's going to win, because the truth is they're all God's people. It's not like God is favoring one over the other. They're all God's people. So Abner finally says, look, there's been enough death. Let's stop. And Joab says, if God lives, as God lives, if you hadn't said that to me, no doubt we would have kept chasing you down all night long. And so they stopped. They finally stopped fighting. You see that in verse 28 of 2 Samuel chapter 2. And Abner and his men go back to Ishbosheth. And then, of course, David's men stopped, and they had killed a lot of the men of Benjamin, which, of course, was the tribe of Saul. And that's where Abner's from as well. So now, David's men go back to Hebron, and Abner's men go back to the crossover Jordan that night. Now, you want to keep going, because we're reading both of these chapters together. In 2 Samuel chapter 3, we see that the war continues on. And we don't get a whole lot of descriptions, but basically the army of Saul continues to fight against the army of David, because there's two kings in the land, and that's not okay. There's only supposed to be one. And so they've got to determine who's going to be king here. And so David, it talks about David's family and the sons that were born to him and his wives. There are 4 wives. And it's important who his wives are and who their fathers are. Like, for example, Avshalom or Absalom, which his name Avshalom means father's peace. That's what it means. We call him Absalom. That's the translation in English, but his name is Avshalom. Av is father, Shalom is peace. So father's peace is his name. His mother's name is Maacah, and she is the daughter of Talmai, the king of Jeshur. Now this is important, because we're going to see Absalom go back to his grandfather Jeshur later on, because his mother was a princess. So he's got these ties with 2 people groups. Absalom does. And you're going to see that later kind of playing out, which is important. Then you'll see the other sons and those that are part of David's family. And this lineage here, like who all these sons are, is also important, because his sons are going to make power plays for the throne. Amnon is the firstborn. He's going to actually rape one of David's daughters later on. We're going to see Caleb, we're never going to see anything about Caleb again, who is the son of Abigail, which means he probably died. He might have died young, something like that, because he's having a lot back then. Absalom is the third one. Of course, we know what's going to happen to him. Joab later on is going to kill him. Then we're going to see Adonijah, who is going to make a plea for the throne because the three brothers older than him are all dead. And then there's other sons that come forward. Shephatiah, and then we're going to see Yetriim is another son. But those four are going to be very important. Actually, three of those four: Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah. We're going to see them show back up later. And they are from the top four sons. And of course, Gilead, like I said, we don't hear from him again, so he probably died. They are going to be the ones that are very key to David's story as we go on. Now we see this war, this battle keeps going on. But Ishbosheth brings a charge against Abner. He accuses Abner of sleeping with one of his father Saul's concubines. Now what that means, because you're going to see this later on in the scripture as well. If a man slept with the king's concubine, basically he was trying to become king. He was making a plea for the throne. That's what that meant. The man slept with one of the king's women. That was his way of saying, I'm taking over the kingdom. It was an affront to the king. It was like, I'm taking over the kingdom. I'm going to be the leader. So basically, Ishbosheth was saying to Abner, you're trying to be king. You're saying that I'm the king, but you're trying to be king over Israel. And Abner's like, I've done all this stuff to try to make you king. I can't believe you're accusing me of something with this woman. We don't know if Abner did it or not. We don't know who was right. But the Lord allowed the discord, because then Abner leaves Ishbosheth because he's the one that made Ishbosheth king. Ishbosheth is not very strong. He's not a strong guy. He certainly would never have tried to fight against David. He's a young man. He wasn't even in the battles or the war, so he's not training for war. He's not that guy. But Abner was trying to keep this line of Saul going against Abner, the Benjamite, like Saul was. But now that Ishbosheth has accused him of trying to get the kingdom for himself, Abner leaves Ishbosheth and goes over to David. And he says to David, listen, I will turn this whole kingdom over to you. Because he's mad with Ishbosheth. He can't believe he accused him of something. And so he's like, the Lord said it a long time ago that you was going to be king. I'm going to turn the whole kingdom over to you. Now, what's interesting that he says this to David, the reality is, like, if you knew that, why did you even put Ishbosheth on the throne in the first place? If you knew, the Lord said a long time ago David was going to be king, why did you not just support David in the first place? Why? Because Abner is the one who caused this bit of war. If he would just support David at the beginning, so that the kingdom could have been united when Judah crowned David in Hebron, they wouldn't have had this bit of war between chapters 2 and 3. It wouldn't have happened. But David is pleased. He says, absolutely, thank you. I appreciate it. We're going to work together. And David makes Abner the new commander of his army. Joab is the commander. David makes Abner the commander. Abner then goes out. He's about to go back to Benjamin to tell all the leaders to come and rally behind David. But Joab pretends to call him, just talk to him quietly, and kills him. And he kills Abner because, remember, Abner killed his brother Asahel. But it was in battle. He didn't want to kill him. He told him to stop chasing him. But Joab kills Abner anyway. Now, David gets tremendously upset. And this is important because he could have, when Joab killed Abner, he could have split the kingdom completely. Benjamin could have the whole tribe of Benjamin could have just been against David completely, because Joab being a part of, being the leader of David's army, it would be hard for anybody to believe that David did not tell Joab to do that, to kill Abner. Abner is venerated, respected in the tribe of Benjamin and among the rest of the nation because how close he was to King Saul. So when this happens, David curses Joab. He doesn't kill him. He curses him. When in reality, he should have killed Joab, because David had told Joab specifically, we're working together with Abner. Abner's going to be the commander of the army. Don't touch him. David gave him specific instructions. Joab went against those instructions. But remember I told y'all, this is David's sister's son. In which case, he knows it's not going to be a big upheaval in the kingdom, but it'll be a big mess in his family if he kills his sister's son. And he knows it, so he does not do it, even though that's what's supposed to happen. And the fact that he is king over Judah, the commander of his army, completely disobeyed his order and killed somebody that David had just made covenant with. David was supposed to kill Joab, and he doesn't do it. to save face and peace within the family. So what he does is he curses Joab, and he tells everybody, y'all better start mourning for Abner so that they will know that we did not have ill intent concerning this man, because I was trying to make a treaty with them. I was trying to work together with them. I was trying to bring unity in the kingdom. I was not trying to divide the kingdom. Judah and Benjamin divided against each other. And so everybody starts mourning for Abner. And the people says, it says in verse 26 or verse 36, all the people took note of this. This is David mourning for Abner, and it pleased them. Whatever the king did pleased them. Pleased all the people. So that day, all the people in all Israel understood that the king had no part in the killing of Abner, the son of Ner. And so because of David's honorable actions, again, he mourned for Abner. Instead of saying, well, I'm glad that leader of Saul's army is dead, like he mourns for Abner publicly and leads the people in memorial for Abner. They realize David did not kill him because he's really in mourning. He's upset that this has happened. We realize that it was not David who gave this order, which is important because, again, it brings back the unity and the healing for the kingdom, where this could have really been a very divisive thing for the whole kingdom. So now let's go to some Psalms after we see David fighting for kingdom advancement, because that's the topic we're looking at. We're going to look at some Psalms because there's a lot of Psalms that David wrote throughout all this time. A lot of his Psalms he wrote during the time that Saul was chasing him, which we didn't read all of those when we were reading the chapters about Saul chasing him, but we will read them later on as we relate them to Absalom's rebellion and stuff like that. So we will see those Psalms, and I'll point out that a lot of them were written during that time. But there are others that David wrote as well, and they're not in chronological order in the Psalms. They're all over the place in the Psalms. So you really got to kind of read the Psalms and do your research to find out which ones apply to what timeline during David's time. And others you have to just connect based on the topic. And so we're going to read Psalms 21 and 35 this day. In Psalm 21, I've titled that Blessings for and from God's Victory. And so we see that David is thanking God for victory, and he's crying out to God as well. He's praying to God. And in verse 2, in most versions, verse 3 in the complete Jewish, it says, you give him, this is the king, David is the king, his heart's desire. You don't refuse the prayer from his lips. And so David is affirming that God has been listening to him. God has been blessing him. He talks about that God placed the crown of gold on his head. In the next verse, David has asked God for life and everything. God has blessed him with life, and because there was time when David thought he was going to die. Like he knew, he said, Saul is going to kill me. But the Lord has blessed him with life, and he's given him, time to live and to grow and to establish his kingdom. This has taken some time. It's taken some years. And now he's gotten into the kingship. He talks about the victories that God has given him, the splendor and the glory. And then he talks about the fact that his trust is in Adonai. That's in verse 8 in the complete Jewish, verse 7 in other versions. In the grace of El Elyon, he will not be moved. David saying, I won't be moved because my trust is in you. Which is so beautiful. He talks about the Lord destroying his enemies, and the fact that he is ridding humankind of their posterity, which is what he did. He's gotten rid of almost all of Saul's line, and then we're going to see what happens to Ishbosheth in a minute, because he's going to be gone too. And then in this way, the Lord has really allowed David to come into the place that he prepared for him. And then the last verse says, arise Adonai in your strength, and we will sing and praise your power. And so again, he leads the people in worship. David is always leading the people in worship. Now let's go to Psalm 35, which is another appropriate psalm for what's happening in David's life. And this one I call Contend with Those Who Contend with Me. Because remember, he's got this bitter war happening with the house of Saul, and all types of stuff is happening. But he asks the Lord to oppose those who oppose him, to fight those who fight him. And then he talks about the fact that, he's asking God to rise to his defense and to let David hear, I am your salvation. Literally, I am your Yeshua. He wants the Lord to say, no matter what, I will save you. We'll keep reading scriptures that talk about David's victory in the future. He talks about those who seek David's life, and he asks God to put them into confusion. And then he says, and then when you have redeemed me, I'll be joyful in your presence. I'll rejoice in your salvation. All my bones will say, who is like you? Mika Moka, who is like my God? And he just talks about, how God rescues the weak. But even when malicious liars come forward, God brings them down. He will bring them low. And he won't allow the enemies to gloat over David. And he will, of course, bring David into the rightful place that he's prepared for him. And so that is Psalm 35. But you want to read all of it. Just allow the Lord to minister to you as you're going forward to fight for kingdom advancement. God will fight on your behalf. He will vindicate you. He will rescue you, and then he will give you eternal salvation, which is actually a theme that we see in a lot of David's songs, particularly in Psalm 35. Now let's go to Revelation chapter 11. I want you to read verses 1 through 14. And 1 through 14 is all about the two witnesses. Now, this is very interesting scripture. It's one that I could do an entire Bible study on. These 14 verses, I could do an entire Bible study just on them. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to be brief if I can, even though it's a really important topic. Okay, so remember, John has just eaten the scroll, and he's been told he's going to have to prophesy to the nations. So now he's given a measuring rod, and he goes and measures the temple, the altar, and counts the people that are worshiping there. Now remember, this is an end-time temple, because John is exiled at the island of Patmos, in which case when he gets his revelation, the temple has been destroyed in Jerusalem. This is not the temple in Jerusalem in the first century, because it has already been destroyed by the time John gets his revelation. This is an end-time temple, okay? In Jerusalem, he tells him to go and measure it. And he says in verse 2, but the courtyard outside the temple, the outer court, he says, don't measure it, because it's been given to the Goyim, the Gentiles, and they will trample over the holy city for 42 months. Now, this is important that we get that. It's important that we understand what is happening, because there is a fight for Jerusalem, in which case Israel has a portion of Jerusalem. We see that Palestinians have another portion of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount even. Though it is literally in Israel's hands, they've given the sovereignty to Palestinians, and Palestine is asking for its own state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And this is very important that we get that, because the Lord is saying that part of this temple area is going to be given to the Gentiles, and they're going to trample it. They're going to trample it down, meaning they're not going to be worshiping God. They're going to be defiling things. And this is exactly what Palestinians do. You can see that they did that in Bethlehem. They did that in Rachel's tomb. They did Abraham and Sarah's tomb. Any holy site that go into the hands of the Palestinians, they start to destroy it. They desecrate it, they destroy it, and then they try to say it's a holy site to them so that you can't get it back. But they don't venerate it. They don't build it up. They don't worship at it. They start to desecrate it. It's like really just being offensive as they possibly can be to Jews and Christians. And so this is what the Lord is talking about here. Like we see very clearly when he's talking about the nations, he's talking about the Palestinians. But the reason he doesn't just point them out, because he could say the Philistines, because that's who they're descended from, because that's the language that John would have understood. He says the nations, the Gentiles, the Goyim. And the reason he says it is because what's pushing them, what's behind them, what's supporting them is the United Nations. What's supporting them is the nations. So as the Palestinians are desecrating and trampling on the things of God in Jerusalem and trying to have East Jerusalem as a capital and fighting in Jerusalem, like literally they used to drop big rocks off the Temple Mount onto the heads of those who were praying at the Kotel, at the Wailing Wall. Like this is what the Lord is talking about. And he's saying that they will have this portion area, even though there'll be an area where God's people will be worshiping. There'll be another area that these Gentiles, supported by the nations, are going to trample on and desecrate for 42 months. And it's important that we get that, because that is a long period of time. That is almost 4 years that they are just, desecrating this area, and that the nations are behind them as they're doing it. They are supporting them in them doing it. Which is a big deal. So then the Lord at this time sends his two witnesses. And these two witnesses, they prophesy for 1,260 days dressed in sackcloth. Also almost 4 years. The timeline that we see here is very important as we're looking at these things happening. When that happens, this is the revelation that he gives about these two people. In verse 4 is very, very important. This is a memory verse for you. Revelation chapter 18, verse 4. These are the two olive trees and the two menorahs standing before the Lord of all the earth. Now that language is going to take you back to Zechariah chapter 4. This is very, very important. I know in this, the word reveal, we haven't read Zechariah 4 yet, because we're going to do it when we read the return from the Babylonian exile, because that's when it was written. But I want to take you to Zechariah 4 right now. So when we go to Zechariah 4, you'll remember to connect it back to Revelation chapter 11. Where Zechariah sees a gold lampstand, a menorah, which looks a lot like my necklace. This is the temple menorah. And he's seeing that temple menorah that is all gold, as we the description that Moses got about how that menorah is supposed to look. Then there's two olive trees, olive tree earrings. There's two olive trees on either side of this menorah. This is a revelation that I share oftentimes during Hanukkah. The two olive trees have pipes going into the menorah, and it's pouring olive oil into this menorah. And this is very important because Zechariah asked questions. He's trying to find out who these olive trees are. This is very important. So let's look starting in verse 11 at the description we see here. I replied asking him, what are those two olive trees on the right and the left sides of the menorah? Then I asked the question again, what are these two olive branches discharging the gold-colored oil through the two gold spots? And he replied, don't you know what they are? And I answered, no, my Lord, I don't. Look at verse 14. This is very important that you remember this. He said, those are the two who have been anointed with oil. They are standing with the Lord of all the earth. That's the same language that we just heard in Revelation chapter 11, verse 4. Connect that back. So you've got Revelation chapter 11, verse 4. Then you've got Zechariah chapter 4, verse 14. Connect that language back. You'll see the similar language here. Now, what that tells us is very important. The menorah that we see in the temple is Yeshua. Now, of course, Yeshua talks about walking among the menorahs. Yeshua talks about the fact that he will remove our menorah if we don't love him and worship him the way he says us to. He will remove the lampstand, the menorah from ministries. But we understand, like from observing Hanukkah, we understand that the menorah has a shaft. It has like a tree trunk. Okay, and Yeshua tells us in John 15 that he's the true vine. He's the tree trunk, and it's from that particular light, that middle light, which is why in my menorah that one is red. You light all the other lights from that other light, which means Yeshua is the original light of the world. He lights us from his own light, which is why he says if we don't remember our true love, if we don't do things we did at first, he'll remove our light, he'll remove our lampstand, he'll remove our menorah, because we're no longer connected to his light. And he won't allow us to create strange fire like Nadab and Abihu did, drumming up their own worship when the fire is supposed to come from heaven. We're supposed to give the sacrifice. The fire is supposed to come from God. Now, here is the challenge. Okay, here's the challenge. If Yeshua is the main light of this menorah and he lights us from this menorah, right? And we are all a part of him by being a part of this menorah. The two witnesses, the two olive trees that pour oil into this menorah. See, the menorah in the temple is an oil lamp. It's not a candelabra. The menorahs that we tend to use now, even the one we use in temple service, is a candelabra. But the one that was in the temple was an oil lamp, which means every one of these 7 lights up here were oil lamps. There's an oil lamp at the top of each one. We've read that, of course, in Exodus when the Lord gives the revelation to Moses about building the menorah. They were all oil lamps. And the oil in the lamp is olive oil. So the olive trees on either side of this menorah are pumping olive oil so the menorah stays lit. But in Revelation chapter 11, verse 4, it tells us that these olive trees are 2 witnesses, meaning they're people. They're the 2 that stand before the Lord of all the earth. They stand before God. They're people. They're witnesses of who he is. And they're pumping oil into the menorah so the menorah stays lit. Now, if Yeshua is the main light of the menorah, which is why you take the light away, because he's the light of the world, then he makes us the light of the world, right? It says in 2 different places that he's the light of the world. He also says that we are the light of the world. Now, if we get that, then we realize that these 2 witnesses are witnessing of the identity of Yeshua. They witness of the identity of Yeshua so that the light stays lit, which means we cannot have the light in us if we don't really know who Yeshua actually is. And these 2 witnesses he is. And this is so important in our day and age, which is why we've been repenting so hard, because a false identity of Yeshua has been spread. I told y'all they mixed Yeshua's identity with the sun god, Tammuz, Baal, Odin, Thor's father. Like all these different gods have been mixed in together to create Jesus. but that is not the true Messiah of the Bible, who is Yeshua. These two witnesses, who are also the olive trees, who stand before the Lord of all the earth. And this scripture in Revelation chapter 11, verse 4, also says that they are menorahs, which means they also have light. Okay? They have a light, but Yeshua is the true light, which means they get their light from Yeshua. So they can witness to who he is, but then they also pour oil into the menorah so that we know who he truly is. And this is important that you get that, because this prophecy that John is receiving in Revelation chapter 11, remember in chapter 10, he got a scroll that he ate in his mouth that he could prophesy to nations and kings. But what was it about? It was about the hidden plan of God being brought to the completion, the news that he's proclaimed to his servants. So it's the revelation of the true good news, the gospel of Yeshua. That's the prophecy. And he's starting it right here with two olive trees, two witnesses pouring oil into the menorah. Now let's talk about who the two olive trees are. Very important revelation. In Malachi chapter 4, which we also read around the same time we're reading Zechariah, because it's the end time prophecy after the time of the Babylonian exile. In Malachi chapter 4, it tells us that we got to remember the laws of my servant Moses, and that he would send Elijah on that great and terrible day of the Lord to turn the hearts of the fathers to the sons and the hearts of the sons to the fathers. In the complete Jewish, there is no Malachi chapter 4. It's actually the last few verses of Malachi chapter 3. But we also see in Matthew, I believe it's chapter 17, in the Transfiguration, we see two witnesses. Yep, Matthew 17. They show up to tell us, to identify Yeshua. And they're Moses and Elijah. In which case, the two olive trees that we see in Zechariah chapter 4, and the two witnesses that are also called the two olive trees and the two menorahs in Revelation chapter 11 are Moses and Elijah. Now, what does that tell us? That tells us that in these end times, in order for people to truly be standing with Yeshua, the light of the world, they've got to understand Moses is going to be the law. That's the Torah. They got to believe the Torah. They got to know that it speaks about Yeshua, because Yeshua said, if you believe Moses, you believe because he wrote about me. He said that in John. Very important that we get that. So you got to go back to the Torah. See, in order for the true good news to go forth in these end times to prepare for Messiah's return, you got to understand that Yeshua is the living Torah. The Torah has not been done away with. The only reason why Constantine and others from the Roman background said that we need to do away with the Torah is because the Torah does not reveal Jesus, who is this amalgamation of the sun god and Baal and Tammuz and Odin and all these people. The Torah is not going to reveal that guy that they kind of created to bring all these religions together. The Torah reveals the Jewish Messiah and how Jewish he is and how he fulfills all the prophecies, which is where Elijah comes in. Elijah is going to be the prophet that is the leader of the company of prophets. So every prophecy in the Bible that we see comes out of the company of prophets, which is led by Elijah. Very important that we get that, because we're going to read about Elijah as we continue going forward. He is the leader of the company of the prophets. So he's the one that represents all prophecy. And all prophecy in the Bible leads to Yeshua and reveals his true identity as the Jewish Messiah, because he fulfills all the prophecies. He's the only one that fulfills the Torah and all the prophecies. But if we change his identity and mix him in with all these other gods of the nations, then he does not do that. And so it's very important when these two witnesses come forth that people actually repent and see him as a Jewish Messiah who fulfills Torah and the prophets. Because when we repent and we receive him as that Messiah, guess what happens? The oil comes from these two olive trees and goes into the menorah. And literally this miracle we see in Zechariah chapter 4 was fulfilled on the first Hanukkah, 168 BC, when the children of Israel, the Maccabees, fought back the Greeks, cleansed the temple, had only enough oil for one day for the menorah while they were cleansing the temple, and it lasted for 8 days because the two olive trees were miraculously pouring oil into it so that it could last for the miraculous 8 days. They only had enough for one day. It lasted 8 days. So then they created a new menorah, which is called a Hanukkah, that has these two olive trees on the side of it, so that it has 9 candles instead of the 7 lamps that we see in the temple menorah. Like, this is a huge revelation. That's why I said I've done whole teachings on just this. Whole teachings on just this, because it is an important revelation. But this is all about the end times, the times that we are in. And we've got to be careful, because the reality is the Roman Catholic Church supports the Palestinians. when we see the Gentiles trampling on the Temple Mount for 42 months, yes, it's the Palestinians, but it also includes Christians led by the Roman Catholic Church, because the agenda of Rome is still to subvert Jerusalem and Israel and to take the authority of Jerusalem, which is the same agenda as the Palestinians. And it's important that we get that. This is why God is calling us to repentance, because the chasm is widening between those who are his people and those who are not. So if we don't get on the right side of it and we remain lukewarm, we're going to fall right down the middle. And those who fall in the middle are considered not God's people. They're claimed by the enemy. And this is very important because they reject the witness of Moses and Elijah. If we ever say the Torah has been done away with, we're rejecting the witness of Moses. And Moses is a witness of who Yeshua actually is. So to reject the Torah is to reject the witness of Moses, which is to reject Yeshua's true identity. Same thing is true with prophecies in the scripture. If we reject any of the prophets, we reject the witness of Elijah and the whole company of prophets since history began. And we're also rejecting the true identity of Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah. So we can't say we're saved by grace through faith, by the Son of God, if we rejected his actual identity. See, this is key. This is why these prophecies are so important. And they are hidden from those who don't want to know the truth. Those who want to persist in religion and church as usual will never understand this revelation that I just shared with you, because it is hidden, because they have chosen to rebel. They've chosen to persist in their own ways and have rejected the truth of God that is right here before us. Very important. We're going to see David's going to make a couple of mistakes, and he's going to make mistakes because he doesn't have the Bible in front of him like we do. We can go right into the Bible and read about what God wants us to do in any given moment. We can Google it. We can go to BibleGateway.com, anywhere. We can put in stuff and find out what the scripture says. David couldn't do that. He had to have teachers and Levites and priests who helped him understand the scriptures. He had to go back and reread the Torah over and over and over again and find a special place. And he did not have a book on his shelf that he could reference in a million different ways. Strong's concordances and study Bibles and all these different things, Bible studies and devotionals. He didn't have all this stuff that would actually give him reference to the scripture. But we do. And so there is no excuse for us when we have all of these resources right at our fingertips, even on our phones. There's no excuse for us rejecting the witness of Moses and Elijah and thereby rejecting the true identity of Yeshua, because this is what you got to see is going to happen. They're going to come forth. These two witnesses, Revelation chapter 11, they come forth with judgment. Fire comes out of their mouth. That's what that means. Fire, judgment comes out of their mouths, and anybody who tries to harm them is consumed by this fire. So the Torah and the prophets are going to start destroying people that reject the witness of the true Messiah. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen in Israel. And this is very important that we get that, because believers are coming into faith in Israel. And by the thousands, it is happening. Even rabbis are coming to the faith, and they're just being quiet right now because it's not time for them to witness. But when this season comes, they're going to be sharing it, and they're going to be proving that Yeshua is the Messiah through the Torah. Like, it's going to be happening. And when you see it, you're going to realize the scripture is being fulfilled. But there's still going to be people who will reject it, and not just people who are of a different faith, but even Christians, even the Vatican itself, unless they repent, will reject that witness. Very important that we get that, because when that happens, we're going to see destruction happening. Destruction is going to be happening from this rejection of the witness. Even now, some of it has come forth. Now, it's important that we get that, because then after that, the beast, which we're going to start looking at the beast in a minute. He's going to start to show up in the Revelation in a minute. The beast who comes up out of the abyss. We're going to talk about what the abyss is, that black hole that demons are stuck in. That's chaos and darkness and nothingness. He gets released out. And why is he released at this moment? At this moment, why does the beast come up out of the abyss to fight these witnesses? Because of the rejection of this witness. And again, those who reject the witness will not just be people outside of the faith. I'm talking Christians are going to reject this witness of who Yeshua is. And when they reject it, literally they're going to call forth anti-Messiah. And that's what the beast is. If we reject the identity of the true Messiah, we call forth anti-Messiah. And Christians would never believe that they could be a party to calling forth anti-Messiah. But I'm telling you right now, if they reject the witness of Moses and of the prophets and see him as Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, if the church rejects it, the church will be a part of the Gentiles calling forth anti-Messiah out of the abyss. Because if you don't want the true Messiah, the enemy always has a counterfeit for you. When God presents the truth and you reject it, the enemy will always present a counterfeit. And this is what we see happening. And like I said, the church is involved. It's not just those unbelievers. And this is why in this season, God is calling us to repentance. If you have never been interested in the Hebrews of the faith, right now you had better be. Because this is when the rubber's going to meet the road and it's going to matter. It's going to matter because the period of grace is over. The season of the Gentiles has ended. We are going into the Messianic age. And no longer is God tolerating that type of foolishness. No longer, because the king is coming. And so here we see, after they witness, the beast is going to kill them and overcome them, and the world is going to rejoice that these witnesses are now dead. And this is important. Like I said, they won't be just unbelievers. They're going to be Christians in that bunch, rejoicing that these two witnesses are dead. Now, what you need to understand, this is so important, because as you look at this, and it says in verse 8, their bodies will lie in the public square of the great city, that's Jerusalem, which is figuratively called Sodom and Egypt. Why Sodom and Egypt? Because God is going to have to bring in judgment, because like I told you, Jerusalem's going to be split. It's not just going to be in the hands of Israelis and Jews. It's going to also be in the hands of Palestinians or Muslims. In which case, we're going to see that God now has to extract his people out of an oppressor. And this is the very reason why he destroyed Sodom and Egypt, because the oppression. And we talked about that the other day when we were looking at Lot and Abraham in Genesis 18 and 19. In the revelation that I shared, God speaks the visitation. We talked about a reason why Sodom was destroyed. It wasn't just because of its disgusting, perverse practices, but also because it oppressed people. And so it's very important that we get that, because here we see that the nations and the tribes are actually going to be rejoicing that these prophets are dead until 3.5 days are over and God breathes into them and brings them up to be with him, which is going to reveal to the world that God is in control and that they were in fact serving God. Because of course, those in the church who oppose these two witnesses are going to say they're blasphemers and they're not from God. And it's very important that we get that. It's very important that we get that. Because they are, of course, from God, and God's going to reveal it to the world when he brings them back to life. Okay? Because people will be deceived. People are going to think anti-Messiah is the real Messiah. And people are going to think these false witnesses are blasphemous. And they're going to stand with the wrong one. And this is why I said at the very beginning, pleasantries and our own will is not how we discern what is from God. It has to be God himself revealing to us what's him and what's not him, because anything else will be able to be deceived if we're being lured by our emotions. That's what Babylon does, is lured by your emotions. If we're lured by our emotions, by our comfort, by our luxuries, by our agenda, we'll be deceived about who is who. Very, very important, because God will be calling us to a place of discomfort and challenging, and the enemy is going to be proposing lots of comfort and luxuries and everything we want. He's going to be lying, of course, because it's going to lead to death. But in the forefront, it's going to look great. People are going to think, well, that's got to be God, because it's so pleasant. It's such a good remedy that just makes us all happy. But it's a lie. It's very deceptive. And so this is why God is purging us now, calling us to these places of discomfort. So God is calling his people to make sacrifices now. We've got to be willing to do it. A lot of times we're not. A lot of times we just want things our way. We've got to be purged of that, because anti-Messiah, he speaks to that, to wanting things your way. He will actually will attract people who are interested in having things their own way. So it can't be found among God's people. Very important. And so then, after they go back up to the Lord while the enemies watch, in verse 13 it says, in that hour there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city collapsed. So now there's a part of Jerusalem that's going to collapse, because remember, it's been trampled by the Gentiles, which includes the church. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were all struck and gave glory to the God of heaven. So now this is another opportunity for people to repent, because now they realize this was God. Very important that we get it. So the second woe is past. Now the third woe is coming, is what we're about to see. Now let's go to the next day. Transfer of the kingdoms. All that stuff had to happen so we can get to the transfer of the kingdom. 2 Samuel chapters 4 and 5, we see That Ishbosheth gets very nervous now he found out that Abner is dead. And all Israel becomes alarmed because they're like, whoa, God is transferring the king over to David. Then we see that Saul's son, Ishbosheth, had two men who were captains of raiding parties. And they come into Ishbosheth's house. And they decide that they are going to kill him. And this is so important that we get that because they were on his side. They kill Ishbosheth because they realize that he's not the king that they need. That they need a different king. But they're not men who allow God to do things in his own timing like David. They're men of blood. And so they take matters into their own hands and they just kill Ishbosheth. Which is very important that we get that because it's a sad thing that happens. Again, it's bittersweet. Not what God would have wanted, but it's the very thing that positions David to now be able to be king the way that that the Lord had prepared for him to be king. Now, in there, in verse 4, there's a little parenthetical reference that talks to us about Jonathan's son. When it's made known among Saul's household that Saul is dead, Jonathan is dead, Abinadab is dead, and Malchishua are dead, Jonathan has a young son named Mephibosheth, and his nurse flees because she's afraid that either Philistines or somebody else's people are going to try to kill the whole house of Saul. Because that used to happen. If a king died, when the kingdom is transferred into other hands, people will wipe out the whole royal family. So she's afraid that that's going to happen. So she runs with Mephibosheth in her arms. He's like 5 years old, and she falls and trips, and he becomes lame in both feet because she falls and his ankle break. Now, this is important because Mephibosheth is going to come back up. This is Jonathan's son. So you want to remember him. So they just kind of put it here so that you realize that this happened around the same time. Okay. Now, Ishbosheth is dead. And he's been killed by two of his guys who escaped in the night after beheading him, which is so terrible. And they bring the head of Ishbosheth to David. Okay, after they didn't hear about what happened at Amalekite, who thought he was doing something. So they say, here's the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy who wanted to take your life. Today Adonai has taken revenge on Saul and his son for the sake of my Lord the king. And look at what David said. As Adonai lives, who has rescued me from every kind of difficulty, and someone told me, here Saul is dead, thinking to himself that he was bringing good news. I didn't reward him for his news, but seized him and killed him in Ziklag. How much more when criminals have killed an innocent man in his own house on his own bed? Shouldn't I hold you responsible for his death and rid the earth of you? So then David gives orders for these men to be put to death, and they cut off their hands and their feet and they hang them so that everybody will know David does not stand for this ruthless murders, because he doesn't believe that is necessary for him to get into position for God to bless him. He doesn't have to take out Saul's family. That's not what David needs to do. He knew God was going to address Ishbosheth. But the Lord allows this to happen, and David becomes king quickly. But either way, the Lord was going to do it. And so David does go to this type of violence, especially against God's people, because he doesn't need to do that. It's not what God is telling him to do. And he is sowing another good seed in his kingdom, showing people that this is not what we're all about. We're supposed to be a godly kingdom, and this is not something God would have told us to do. This is not God at work. And so he makes it very clear to his people that that is not how they are to function. And he makes a spectacle of these guys who did it. So then we see in 2 Samuel chapter 5 that all of the tribes come to David at Hebron, and they say, Saul was king over us, but now, you led all the military campaigns, and so now we want you to be our one shepherd over all of the people. And so when they do, they crown him king, they make a covenant with David and anoint him as king over all of Israel. He was 30 years old when that happened. And he winds up reigning for 40 years. He had reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. That's that whole fight back and forth with Saul's household. And then he reigns over all Israel for 33 years. And that's important because, again, in First Chronicles, it doesn't tell us about this bitter war that lasted for 7 years, apparently, where David was king only over Judah, and then Ishbosheth was king over the rest of Israel. In First Chronicles, we're going to go there in a minute, you'll see it goes straight to him being king over all of Israel. It doesn't even talk about these 7 years where it was like this split in the kingdom, which is very important we get that, because later on we're going to see the kingdom split. And it's important that we realize that the kingdom was already having these issues of division at this time as well. And David, he addressed it beautifully But when you see that there's challenges in the air, then you got to be careful. You got to be careful to do things God's way, because when you don't, there are consequences for it. So then we continue on. We see that David takes over Jerusalem. And the Jebusites tell him, "Oh, you're not going to get in here." And David, of course, says he's going to get in there, and he does. He gets into Jerusalem, but he does not kill all of the Jebusites. He makes them the servants in Israel. Of course, some of them got killed, some of them were lame, but he winds up keeping them as like servants in Israel. You're going to see the Jebusites show up again later on. And it says in verse 12, then David knew that Adonai had set him up as king over Israel and increased his royal power for the sake of his people. So the whole point is that God is doing this in order to bless David. And Hiram, king of Zor, actually sends cedar logs to David so he can build a palace for himself. And I mean, David gets all this favor that happens. He takes more concubines and wives to himself at this time. He has more sons and daughters. He defeats the Philistines. And because they came after him as soon as they found out that he had been made king of Israel, of all of Israel. Because remember, the Philistines were bitter enemies against Israel. Apparently, they left him alone when he was only king of Judah. But when he becomes king of all of Israel, they go, okay, he's gotten too powerful now. We got to take him out. He used to be among us. Now we got to kill him. And of course, it does not go well with them. God gives David victory over them. And after the Lord has given him specific instructions about attacking these Philistines. And this is what I love about David, because David asked the Lord, and the Lord gives him specific instructions. The first time, God tells him to go straight up. The second time, he tells him to wait. He says, wait until you hear the sounds of marching troops in the tops of the balsam trees. That'll mean the Lord is already going before you. So that means that there were angels, angel troops that have gone out before David, and they're going to attack the Philistines before David even gets there. And because David did exactly as the Lord says, he has victory. Now I want to take you to 1 Chronicles chapter 11. And you'll remember where we were in 1 Chronicles chapter 10. Saul takes his own life. The guy brings the crown to David, and on all of that. That isn't even mentioned in 1 Chronicles. Saul takes his own life, and Philistines take his body back to their temple. That's what's mentioned in 1 Chronicles 10. Then it goes straight to 1 Chronicles 11, and it says what we just read in 2 Samuel chapter 4, where all Israel comes to him at Hebron and says, "We're your own flesh and blood. When Saul was our king, you led the military campaign." Like, they skip the whole 7 years where David is the only king of Judah and go right to David being king over all of Israel. And again, the purpose is that they're trying to unite Judah and Benjamin and Levi, because those are the tribes that make up Judah at this point. The nation of Judah that comes back out of exile in Babylon, and they're uniting them. There were even some people from Manasseh and Ephraim who had come down to Judah because they did not want to worship the golden calves in the northern kingdom, which we'll see later. And so they're trying to unite everybody. So they don't talk about the fact that there was this civil war between David and Ishbosheth and all that. They don't talk about that. They talk about when the whole nation is united and David is king over all of them, because they're trying to point out what David did to build this one united kingdom, because they're saying we need to do that same thing again. We need to build a united kingdom again. We need to do what David did again. So we don't point out the divisions. Talks about, again, David capturing Jerusalem, just like we just read. And then it goes into David's mighty warriors, his warrior heroes, his mighty men, and all of the victories some of the victories that David receives, because he has lots and lots of victories. And so we're going to see all these victories happening here, and all of his commanders. And he talks about Abishai and Joab, of course, who were the commanders. Remember, those were David's nephews we talked about already. And so you'll see a lot of them and things that happened, how they broke through the Philistine lines to get David some water. And David wouldn't drink it because it risked their lives. And so you get a lot more details here in 1 Chronicles chapter 11 than what you hear in 2 Samuel about David and his mighty men. You're not going to hear some of these stories in 2 Samuel. And then all of his mighty men are listed. Literally, every single one of his listed. Even Asahel, which we know died during those 7 years with the fight with Abner. And so he still lists him there because he had been a part of David's mighty men. And so we see him being listed here, which is very important. I also want you to read chapter 12, 1 Chronicles chapter 12. And in this one, it actually goes back a little bit. Though it talks about David being crowned king over all of Israel, Chronicles goes back a little bit in chronological time And it talks to us about people who would come and join David before he even was crowned king over all of Israel, and how there were people who joined him in Ziklag when he was still running from Saul. It talks about them. It talks about people coming from other tribes, tribe of Gad, even the tribe of Benjamin. And some people had come to him from the tribe of Benjamin. And so this chapter, chapter 12, is a beautiful chapter for us to see how David's army builds up. So when we read in First Samuel, Second Samuel, chapters 4 and 5 of this bitter war. Actually, it was in chapters 2 and 3, the bitter war for the crown. When he had this huge army, where did this army come from? Here in First Chronicles chapter 12, we see where the army comes from. They kind of go backwards a little bit and show us all the people that came from all the different places that became a part of David's army. And this is very important. It's very important that we get the people that came into David's army, because when they did, they brought all of these different skills with them. They brought beautiful talents, beautiful skills, and they really added to what was needed as he is creating this army. And they are single-minded. They're amazing warriors. They love the Lord, and this is the very thing he needs to build an army. And it talks about that his army was kind of like the army of heaven, which is just amazing, because it was, you see God doing some important things in his life. And that's, of course, verse 22 in First Chronicles chapter 12. In most versions, or it's verse 23 in the complete Jewish. So, indeed, reinforcements to assist David reached him daily until there was a great army like the army of God. And so David's army has been building the whole time. Saul is chasing him. While, all this stuff is happening, David's army keeps building. And this is very important for us, because it kind of seems, when you read it in Samuel, that he just becomes king. And it's like, well, what happened? How did he become king? Well, these men kept joining him. They kept, and for a soldier to join a man to lead them as their commander, that means they trusted their whole lives with him. Because when they came with their families. They came with their wives and their children. And they camped with David. They traveled with David. This is why when the Amalekites came and took everybody away, this was such a terrible thing, because the men were like, we trusted our families to you. And the plan you came up with left our families unprotected, and now they're gone. And so they were like, you can't be our leader anymore. They were going to kill him. And so he strengthens himself in the Lord. And then the Lord gives him a plan, and then they get their families back. And so you see that they're trusting in David's leadership. And this is why more people keep joining him as the time continues to go on, which is so important. And there's two scriptures that I want to point out to you here in First Chronicles chapter 12. And it says, this is one that we quote all the time: the descendants of Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel ought to do. And then it tells us there were 200 leaders of them, and then there's lots of men under their command. But I actually like what it says about the men of Zebulun. Like, I love this, because to me, as I build a ministry, certainly I want to know people who understand the times and know what to do, but I also want to know people who have the qualities of these men of Zebulun as well. And it says in the next verse, of Zebulun, 50,000 men were fit for military service, so they were fighters, experienced in war, that had experience in it, and able to use all kinds of weapons, so they were trained. They were brave, so they got strong hearts, and none was double-minded. Like, for real, when I'm looking for people to go into war with me, I'm talking about intercession, deliverance, fighting against demonic principalities. That's what I'm looking for right there. That they are fit for war. Like, they know this is a fight. They know it's a fight. They're ready to fight the fight. They got experience in fighting and through prayers and deliverance and fasting. Like, they know what it looks like. They're ready to do it. They're brave. They know we have authority over the enemy. They know how to use the weapons of their warfare, which are not carnal, but mighty through God, to pulling down the strongholds, casting down imaginations and every high thing that resort itself against the knowledge of Messiah, and that they are not double-minded, meaning they are singularly focused on the will of Yahweh. They're not over here, over there, thinking about this, trying to do this. They're all about the will of God. See, when people come together and they have those qualities, enemy cannot touch us. And this is why it's so important that we really become warriors for God. And so I'm going to encourage you actually to memorize both of those scriptures. 32 and 33 in most versions, is 33 and 34 in the complete Jewish. So please remember those scriptures so that you can actually memorize them, as you go forward and be those types of warriors. All right, so now let's go to do some more scriptures. Oh, also, I do want to add that these soldiers, the ones they talk about at the end, came to David in Hebron when he was becoming king. And so some of them we see having a Ziklag, some of them came along the way when he was running from Saul, others came to him in Hebron. But either way, the Lord keeps building to and adding to David's army. Now we want to go to Revelation chapter 11 and do the next 4 verses of that chapter. We're not reading the whole thing because actually one verse we want to save, but we're reading verses 15 through 18. And this is when the seventh angel sounds his shofar. Other version says trumpet, but it's a shofar. And when he does, loud voices in heaven say, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and his Messiah." See, this is a transfer of the kingdom. It goes from the world to the Messiah. And he will rule forever and ever. So now the kingdom is transferring spiritually because we're about to see Messiah show up on the scene. The 24 elders sitting on the thrones in God's presence fell on their faces and worship God. And we thank you, Adonai, God of heaven's armies, the one who was and is, and that you have taken power and have begun to rule. Now watch this, they continue. The Goyim, the nations raged, but now your rage has come. The time for the dead to be judged, the time for rewarding your servants, the prophets, and your holy people, those who stand in awe of your name, both small and great. It is also the time for destroying those who destroy the earth. Very important that we get that, because the Lord is judging people who act like the destroyer, who is Satan, and destroy the earth through greed and enterprise, like not caring about the effects that they have on the rest of the world or what they're leaving for future generations. God is judging that. Very important that we get that. Very, very, very important. Okay, now we're going to go to the next day. So we're not reading verse 19 yet. That's when we're going to save that. We're going to the next topic, which is learning to rightly approach God. Very important topic. Learning to rightly approach God. All this is about our topic for the week, which is coming into authority. We must learn to rightly approach God. And we're going to see David kind of learn the hard way. We're going to see it in Samuel and in Chronicles. In 2 Samuel, in chapter 6, we're going to read verses 1 through 11. And in 1 Chronicles, we're going to read chapters 13 and 14, because 1 Chronicles gives us a lot more description than we see here in 2 Samuel. In 2 Samuel chapters 1 through 11, we see, of course, let me remind you of something. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant had come in town. The men were looking at it, and then they all died. Because remember, the Philistines sent it back on a new cart. Remember, we read that? The Philistines sent it back to Israel on a new cart. They set on a rock. Thousands of Israelites died. Then they sent it to Kiriath Jearim. Okay? That was a town where there was some priests. They knew what to do. They put the ark away, and so people couldn't look at it, and it stayed there. This is where the ark is. Let me explain it to you, because the ark is not with the tabernacle. It has never been united with the tabernacle since Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, took it out of the tabernacle and took it into battle with the Philistines. The Philistines captured it, and when they sent it back, nobody took it back to the ark. Took it back to the tabernacle. It has not gone back to the tabernacle yet. It is among the town of priests, but it's not back at the tabernacle. And this is important that we get that, because I remember I was actually talking to the Lord about that this morning. And when he brought this before me, it was like, oh, that's right. David didn't go to the tabernacle and take it out and bring it to Jerusalem. He went to Kiriath Jearim, where the priest had it, but it wasn't back at the tabernacle. It has not been back at the tabernacle since Hophni and Phinehas removed it. It hasn't been back there. They've still been worshiping at the tabernacle, but the ark has not been in it. And that's important, because now David is saying, hey, look, I think it's time for us to go get the ark. It's been sitting in that town for a long time. It's supposed to be in the presence, in the midst of all of God's people, so we can worship God. That's where it's supposed to be. But he talks to his men, but he does not consult God. And apparently he doesn't talk to the Levites, or the Levites are just kind of people pleasing him, did not tell him the will of Yahweh. And he puts it on a new cart like the Philistines had done when they sent it back to Israel. He puts it on a new cart and brings it out of the house of Abinadab, who is a priest, and they go forward with this cart. Now, the problem of this is so important, is that his sons are now, they're driving a new cart, and they're taking this cart, they're taking this, the Ark of the Covenant, where David wants to bring it to, which is Jerusalem. But that nobody was ever supposed to touch it. However, when the cart stumbles, Uzzah takes his hand and he steadies the ark because he doesn't want the ark to fall on the ground. That would be bad. However, he's not supposed to touch it. Even when the priests carry it, they don't touch it. He touches it to steady it and dies instantly. David then freaks out because he's like, we're trying to do a good thing with the presence of God, and clearly we've done something wrong. And so they go to the side and they take it to the house of Obed Edom. He's the Levite, and we're going to see him later on. Obed Edom is a Levite. And they leave it there, Obed Edom's house. Because they're like, look, apparently we did something wrong. Where Uzzah just died, he touched the ark. I don't know what's wrong. And they leave the Obed Edom house. And again, nobody has told him. He has priests around him. He's got Levites around him. Nobody has told him that the Torah requires that the ark be carried on the shoulders of the Levites by the poles. He got all these Levites and priests around him. Nobody said anything. Nobody said anything to him because David does not know the right way to carry the ark. Nobody's giving him advice and counsel. Now, the challenge with this is that his troops and his men, whom he consulted, they give him all types of good counsel and advice. They're wise people. But the Levites and priests have not stepped into their role because they should have counseled David about the proper way to handle the ark. Now, it is possible that once Hophni and Phinehas died, because they were not good leaders, they were wicked leaders, Eli died same day, also not a good teacher. He raised up Samuel, but he didn't raise up his sons rightly. It is possible that the priesthood had become so corrupt that the priests were not getting trained the way they were supposed to be trained. And that's possible. It is possible that they weren't reviewing the Torah as they should have been, and they didn't remember all the requirements. And because the ark had been out of their possession for some time, and had been sitting in Kiriath Jearim, nobody's really praying about it, nobody's really thinking about it. So it's possible that they need to be refreshed about what was supposed to happen with the ark. That is possible. But the reality is that was their job to know. It was their responsibility to know how they were supposed to carry this ark around, how it was supposed to be transported. And nobody says anything to David. Nobody gives him counsel about what he's supposed to do with this ark. And so he does what he saw the Philistines do, or what he heard the Philistines did when they sent it back. And that was not the way that God's ark is supposed to be transported. So Uzzah dies. Now, we're going to go to, that was 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 1 through 11. Now we're going to go to 1 Chronicles 13 and 14, where we see, again, the same thing, where we see here, David consulted with the commanders of thousands and of hundreds and with every leader. Here in 1 Chronicles chapter 13, it tells us who he consulted with. In 2 Samuel 6, it did not tell us he consulted with his commanders and leaders. Remember, I told you Chronicles is going to give you a little more information. I read all of these, so my mind is one big story. But Chronicles gives you a little more information. He talked to his leaders and his commanders. That was a very costly lesson. And so they didn't know how the ark was supposed to be transported. They knew how to war. That's what they knew what to do. They knew how to go to war. He talks to the wrong guys. And so they all say, yes, let's go get the ark. We're going to bring it up. King, everything you say is good. And they all agree with him. They go get the ark. And we see here again, of course, Uzzah dies. We're going to see it again. And now it tells us very clearly that they went up to Kiriath Jearim. It talks about it very clearly where they got it from. And we'll remember that's the place where the ark was left after all the men died when it was put on that rock before. And so we see that they take it. We see all the same stuff we just saw in 2 Samuel chapter 6. But we see here that there's also a celebration. This one tells us about all of the lutes and the lyres and the tambourines and the cymbals and the songs and the trumpets and all this stuff that happens. But when it gets to the threshing floor, Kidon's threshing floor, this is where it stumbles. And the threshing floor is where you separate the wheat from the chaff. That which is useful to God and that which is useless. And this is so important because it's at the threshing floor that it stumbles, and God makes this distinction. He makes it very clear this is not what y'all supposed to be doing at the threshing floor. And that is because he does it to us too. He will allow us to go forward, and then he will show us at some very important point, this is not what I want you to do. And we've got to respond. David immediately responds because when somebody dies, he knows something's wrong. And so he immediately responds. They, of course, send the ark to Obed-Edom's house, and it stays there for 3 months. And here in this chapter, it tells us that all of Obed-Edom's house was blessed because the ark was there, because Obed-Edom is a Levite. See what I mean? His whole household is blessed. Which is so interesting. So Obed-Edom could have told him right when he dropped it off, hey, you know what? The way y'all was transporting that was not right. Didn't say anything. Just let the ark stay there, and his household is being blessed. Now you go to the next chapter, First Chronicles chapter 14, which gets away from the ark for a minute. We can go back to the ark on the following day. And it talks about the fact that David is still blessed. His household's been blessed. Hiram is sending those logs from the villa palace, which we saw earlier. And we see it again. He takes on more wives and concubines, which we saw earlier. We're seeing it here now in Chronicles. We see him defeating the Philistines, which is very important what David is doing here as he defeats the Philistines. But we see him again, like I told you, he consulted God. We read that a minute ago. Now we're reading it again in Chronicles. He consults God, gets the victory, and his reputation spreads to all the nations. And this is important because we realize that God was only teaching him a lesson. The lesson was to learn to rightly approach God. God didn't take his favor away. He's still favoring David. David's still winning. He's still victorious. Like all type of good stuff is happening. But Uzzah died because that wasn't right. And the Lord will do the same thing for us. He disciplines those who he considers to be sons. And so we will get those little chastisements, and they may hurt and they may sting in very tender places, but we'll never forget. We'll never forget. And David will never forget. You see him continually approaching God about the right way to do things from this point forward. Like literally, David is being called into a priestly responsibility. Even though, of course, he's not a priest, he's a king. But being the ancestor of Messiah, being the precursor to Messiah, we see him as a king now because he's interested in worshiping God. He has to learn the ways of the priest because the priest did not volunteer the information. When they should have, they don't. So David now has to search the scriptures and read the responsibility of the priest so he can rightly approach God. And this is so important that we get that because many of you, like I said, you may be repenting at this point, but previous teachings may have taught you some wrong stuff. And now you got to read the Bible for yourself, which is what we should always be doing. But now you got to read it for yourself to make sure you know how you're supposed to approach the Lord. Because somebody probably told you wrong. And it has some negative effects on your life, on your relationship with God, and on things happening around you. And so now you've got to go, okay, Lord, I want to be a part of your kingdom. I don't want to be one of those ones who thinks I know you. And then I come before you, and I say, Lord, Lord, but you say, depart from me, I never knew you. I don't want to be that person. So you got to show me the way you want me to approach you. And this is the place that David goes into now. Because he had been just a warrior. Now he starts seeking God about priestly things. And it's essential because you already know that God's going to use him to prepare for the temple. And so it's like the Lord allowed the priest to not tell him anything, allowed the Levites to be completely silent when they totally could have been training him. The Lord allows this so that David will search the scriptures for himself. And he'll go into prayer and the fasting and the worship and allow God to speak to him because of the anointing that's going to be on his life as he goes forward and how David embodies this assignment of Messiah to be king and priest. David is now thrust into the priesthood, or at least looking into the priesthood because Uzzah dies and trying to transport the ark. Like it changes everything for him, which is very important because he actually winds up getting the priest back in line, which says to me that they were really out of position. If the king has to get the priesthood in line, the priesthood was in trouble. And we know that because Eli's household was already cursed. Like all this stuff had already happened. The whole town of priests was killed by Saul. So there was some challenges happening in the priesthood. We already know that. And David later on gets it all in order in preparation for the temple. So now let us go to Psalm 6. I want you to go to Psalm 6 as we continue to learn to rightly approach God. Go to Psalm 6. Another Psalm of David. And I have titled this one, Save Me in Grace. And it doesn't tell us, historically, we don't know when David wrote this one, but it's a beautiful one when he cries out to God, that God would hear his prayer, not rebuke him in anger, not discipline in the heat of his fury, because he asked God to heal him and to minister to him and to send his glory back to him. And to me, it was very applicable to thinking about him really trying to do something good for God, and then Uzzah dies. And now he's just distraught. Like, and he's just like, I didn't even know how I messed up. I don't know what I did wrong, but clearly you're upset with me. And so he's crying out to God, knowing he's got enemies all around that are just looking for opportunities to kill him. And so he's like, Lord, please don't take your grace from me. Please rescue me. Please hear my prayer. Please, confound my enemies and keep me close to you, even though I've clearly done something wrong. Don't hold it against me. He really cries out to God here in Psalm 6, which is a beautiful picture of his heart because he was very repentant. He always sought the Lord. He never shook his fist at God and was like, if this is the way you're going to treat me, I'm going to worship another God. And a whole lot of kings did that, but David never did that. So let's go to the next day. The topic of the next day is carrying God's glory, which is so amazing because, of course, he learned to rightly approach God. A very costly lesson. Now he is going to carry the glory rightly. And that's important for us too, because these are things we learn kind of, on the job. we don't learn it always through training and teaching. Sometimes we minister before God and he'll just show us this is pleasing to me, this is not pleasing to me. And we've got to respond right. And allow him to train us like little children. Don't be proud, don't be arrogant, don't be angry. Instead, repent and let him keep teaching you. Accept the discipline as a son or a daughter, and then let him keep training you. And so here we go. We're back in 2 Samuel chapter 6, and we're reading the rest of that chapter, verses 12 through 23. And so now we see David actually go back and get the ark, because here it tells us he finds out that Obed-Edom's house is blessed. So then he goes, okay, so God is not mad at the nation. He's blessing Obed-Edom's household because the ark is there. So clearly we just did something wrong, because he's not mad at us. Like the whole town isn't dying. Like we just must have done something wrong. So now David actually learns what must be done to transport the Ark of the Covenant. He does some inquiry, and now he goes back and he decides that we're going to take this Ark of the Covenant up from Obed-Edom's house, and we're going to bring it to the city of David, also known as Jerusalem. And so in verse 13, it's so beautiful because now he worships even more. Like he is all about worship. Like he becomes, like his worship takes on a whole nother level now that he has really learned about the priesthood. He's really learned about the priest's responsibilities and what God requires and what God likes. Now his worship just goes to another level. He starts to lead the nation in worship, which was his calling. So like the situation with Uzzah had to die because it thrust David into this place that we all really needed him to be in. And that's so important because we all have experienced so many challenging things, but we don't know how God can turn those bad things into beautiful things. And so let God minister to you. Let him use you. Let him turn your joy into dancing, which is an actual song we're going to see David talk about this week. And so here we see that it says, when the people carrying the ark, of course, this is the Levites because they carry it on their shoulders the right way this time, had only walked 6 steps, David sacrifices an offering to the Lord, an ox and a fattened sheep. And then he dances with abandon before the Lord, wearing a ritual vest. So now, this is so beautiful. He's the king, accepted a priestly calling on his life. That's why he's wearing a ritual vest, which is very unorthodox for a king. But he has taken on a priestly calling. It's like in his worship, in his prayer, in his study time, his reading of the Torah, God calls him to be a kingly priest or a priestly king. And he accepts, and now he's got this ritual vest on, which we did not see this before because he realizes, okay, priests are supposed to be carrying this. And though I'm not going to carry it on my shoulders because I'm not a priest or a Levite, I'm going to present myself before God as a priest so that he can accept my worship. And he dances with abandon before before the Ark of the Covenant, which is the glory seat, the mercy seat that has the manifest presence of Yahweh on it. And so everybody it is brought up before the ark, and everybody just processes with the ark, and it is an amazing procession. The shofars are sounding, and they bring the Ark of the Covenant into the city of David, also known as Jerusalem. And his wife Michal, or Michael, is actually not the same name Michael. It's different than the man's name Michael, which is Mikael in Hebrew. It's Michal in Hebrew, which is a different name. It means something completely different. But Michal is, she sees him dancing before the ark, and she has disdain before him for the way that he's dancing before Yahweh. She has contempt for him. And this is important that we get that, because as the queen, as his wife, she was supposed to be rejoicing with him. She should have been down there with everybody else. She should not have been in the palace window looking at him out the window to dance before this ark. But there's a couple of things you got to understand about this situation. First off, we've already read, like I didn't actually mention this portion, but it's already happened in scripture. Once he became king, one of the things he required, when they said, "We want to be king over all of Israel," he says, "Well, bring me back my wife Michal." That's one of the things he asked for. She, who I betrothed to myself for the price of 100 Philistine foreskins. But of course, he killed 200 Philistines and gave the 4 skins to Saul, but Saul asked for 100. So they take Michal from Paltiel's house. Remember the guy that Saul had given her to. They take her from that guy who walks behind her crying for like a mile. So they send him back home and they bring Michal to David. Now David has already married these other wives. He got other wives. She had this other husband, but he brings her to himself like a triumphant king, saying, "If y'all want me to be king, give me my wife back." And they bring the wife back. But like I said, she's already been with another husband at this point, which breaks the Torah. She's not supposed to be back with David now after she's already been with Paltiel and given to him as his wife. She's not supposed to be back with David. But this is the thing David did not ask God about. He's been arrogant about it, and he just wants his wife back, which is, basically, his command, his way of kind of demanding restoration from the nation because Saul wronged him. Saul totally wronged him. But this wasn't the way to handle that. So she's not with him when he brings the ark back, which means that she's not in a place where worship is important to her. The presence of Yahweh is important to her. It's not what's important to her. What's important to her is being in the palace, that she was the princess. Her father was the king. So she grew up as a princess. Being in the palace is important. The power is important. The prestige is important to her. Presence of God, not important to her. Her father did not do that. He didn't build altars to the Lord. He didn't worship the Lord. He didn't teach his family to do that. He didn't have them giving sacrifices to the Lord. He certainly wasn't like dancing before God's presence like we see David, because Saul didn't have that type of relationship with God. So she's not used to this. And in her mind, kings don't behave this way. And so she has contempt for him. But then David blesses all the people, gives them food and sends them away, just happy. And everybody's just so overjoyed in the presence of Yahweh. And then the ark has now come to the place where David is, and come to the city of David. But when he comes home to bless his own household, Michal actually has something to say. And she says, in verse 20, "Such honor the king of Israel earned for himself today, exposing himself before servants, slave girls, like some vulgar exhibitionists." And this is so important we understand what happened. Oftentimes in movies, you'll see David throwing off his robes to dance, but that's not what happened. This is Middle East. It's Judah, which is literally right at the border of Africa. And in this time, people who were in royal status, and sometimes in Africa they still do it, they wore yards of clothing wrapped around themselves. That was their outfit. Yards of very expensive embroidered, beautiful cloth was wrapped around them. That was going to be that was their garment. And like I do African dance, I've done African dance for 25 years. And so I know when you're doing African dance, if you do not have your clothing secured very seriously, the African clothing, like I said, that type of clothing, when it's wrapped like that, it's not secured, fastened with stuff. It's wrapped tightly so that if you just do regular stuff, it won't come off. But if you're dancing in full strength with abandon before the Lord, those clothes start to unravel and they start to come off of you. I know this in doing African dance. That has happened to me and other dancers, where the outer wrapping might start to come off. Other stuff will come off too, which is why you always make sure you got stuff on underneath. Point being, David didn't just throw off his clothes. He literally danced out of them and didn't care because he's worshiping God. I'm sure he had on undergarments, garments under this big, kingly cloth. He had other, garments under there. But what's important to note is that his focus was on worshiping God. Her focus, though, was on the position of the king and the queen. And that's what she cared about. And so this is because their priorities are different and their focus is different. They actually come into a terrible disagreement here that affects their marriage forever. You don't hear anything else about this wife. And in fact, David says some very harsh words to her, which we're going to read in a minute. And then God actually closes her womb. He curses her so that she does not have any children of David. Again, shutting down that line of Saul, so that there is not a child that is from David's line and Saul's line, because probably people would have preferred that be the next king. The Lord closes her womb so that there is no seed from her that comes from the line of Saul. So that this thing that's in her for worship, that we know was also in Saul because he was not a worshiper, it ends. And so David says to her, after she says that he humiliated himself in this robe in front of the slave girls, David says to her, in the presence of Adonai, who chose me over your father, and this is kind of in her face, and over everyone in his family, to make me chief over Adonai's people over Israel. I will celebrate in the presence of Adonai. I will make myself still more contemptible than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But those slave girls you mentioned will honor me. And then, of course, it says that she was barren the rest of the days. Now, this scripture, because I told you I'm a dancer, and so as God was developing worship in me some 20 years ago, He turned my dance into a praise dance. So every dance I've ever done, ballet and jazz and modern dance and African dance, all of it comes together to create a praise before Yahweh. This is how I worship Him. And so I remember when the Lord was birthing that worship out of me, He gave me this scripture right here, verse 22, and it just kept ringing in my spirit so that I would not worry about people watching me when I was dancing before the Lord or feeling uncomfortable or anything. I wasn't focusing on it at all, that I would focus on the Lord. And the way I originally um, memorized it was, I'll become even more undignified than this. Now, it's not one of your memory scriptures, but I want to tell you, if you're struggling in worship and what people are going to think about your worship and what they're going to say about your worship and, da 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 da, and you're focusing on humans instead of on God, is to really meditate on the scripture and allow Him to just minister that to your soul, that I'll become even more undignified than this. Meaning that whatever the Lord wants from me, I'm going to give it to Him, regardless of what people think or say. I'm going to give Him the worship that He wants. And the Lord kept bringing it back. I mean, it just over and over and over. I would become even more undignified than this. Whenever I was worried about what the people in the congregation would say, or whether they would think I was trying to perform, or whatever they would think about me, I would close my eyes and find a spot where I know I wouldn't run into anybody, because when I dance, I'm all over the place, like David. Um, I would make sure I wasn't like around, wouldn't be run into or hit anybody, and I wouldn't be in anybody's way, off to the side or the back somewhere. But then I would close my eyes and just dance, and that's all I would hear. I'll become even more dignified than this. I'll become even more dignified than this. And now it's in me. Now, if the Lord said dance, I dance. Like, it's in me. But it was a season where He had to just drill that in me. And it was this scripture right here that allowed that to be a part of who I am as I minister before Him. And so I want to encourage you, if you're dealing with that worship and you're trying to let God seal it in you, meditate on that scripture right there. 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 22. And specifically, that's all I remember was that little part right there. I'll become even more dignified than this. I didn't read all the rest of it. I didn't memorize all the rest of it. I just needed that piece to remind me that I was doing it in front of Him, and it was not about the people at all, no matter who had something to say. Even family members, didn't matter. I'll become even more undignified than this, because this was, of course, His first wife, and that's who's having something to say at this point. So now, I want to take you to 1 Chronicles chapters 15 and 16, because we want to see a similar account, of course, of these same events happening, and we want to understand what the Lord is doing and what David is saying. So here we are, 1 Chronicles chapter 15. We see the ark coming up to Adonai. And this is so important because David, in 1 Chronicles, he mentions the fact that he knows now that only Levites are supposed to carry it. So we see very clearly, because in First Chronicles, the First and Second Chronicles, they're really looking at all the stuff David put in place for the temple services, because they got to rebuild the temple. They got to rebuild the temple. They got to reinstitute worship. They got to, put the Levites and priests back in place. They got to do all that stuff. And so it was important to them, the process that David was going through as this was happening. So there's a lot more details about this in Chronicles than we see in Samuel and in Kings. But here we go. This is what it says in verse 2. Then David said, no one but the Leviim, or the Levites, should carry the ark of God, because Adonai chose them to carry the ark of Adonai and to serve Him forever. So he doesn't mention that in Samuel, but we see it here because we see now David knows. Now David knows who's supposed to be doing stuff, and it lists the Levites and the priests that he has actually as a part of this procession. So now he is checked to make sure you're a Levite, you're a priest. He's making sure they're actually from the tribe of Levi, that they're actually descendant of Aaron, if they're a priest, and that they're in the position, that they're trained, they know what to do. He's got it all in place at this point. He talks about that he calls Zadok, he called Abiathar, like they're specific priests that were the lead priests that he calls and puts them into place to make sure that they're doing what needs to be done. Levites, including Abinadab, who was there before, but he's like, people are in their position now, so that they can do what the Lord told them to do. Now he rebukes them because, remember, I told you I didn't tell them the right thing the first time. We see it here in Chronicles, and now he's getting down to business. In verse 12, he says, "You are the clan leaders of the Levi'im, the Levites. Consecrate yourselves, both you and your kinsmen, to bring the ark of Adonai, the God of Israel, up to the place I have prepared for you." It's because you weren't there the first time that Adonai, our God, broke out against us. We didn't seek him out according to the rule. See, now he's like, we're getting it right this time. Consecrate yourselves. And so these particular Levites were not there the first time. These are the clan leaders. And so he's like, now you guys need to get in place. And the Levites that were there the first time probably were not consecrated for the work that needed to be done. And so this is now David, he has studied. He has studied the Torah. He has prayed. He has worshiped. God has given him instructions, and now he's giving the priests and Levites instructions, which I want to share with you. If you serve in ministry, don't make the leaders have to do all of that work. If there's an area that you serve in ministry, you should know it backwards and forwards, and you should be advising your leaders so that they will know. Give them the scriptures, give them the background, and help them, because leadership is a challenging job. As king, really, David shouldn't even have to do this. He's got a high priest. He's got a whole family of priests. He's got a whole tribe of Levites with 3 clans among them. They should have handled this the first time. As soon as they found out the king was trying to move the ark, they should have got into position, and they should have contacted him and made sure he knew what to do. But they weren't in their roles doing things the way they ought to be done. So, of course, we see that Uzzah dies. Now, David has to do all this research himself, come into a priestly role, and put them into position, which, of course, is not the way it ought to have happened. But what the Lord is doing is he's showing us Messiah being king and priest, because Messiah is king, but he's also high priest. And so David is really functioning like the high priest who should have been in charge of all this in the first place. That's what David is doing. He's really functioning in that high priest role. So then he instructs them in verse 16 to make music before the Lord. He tells the Levites to make music before the Lord, because they made music before the Lord when they brought it up with Uzzah. But the other Levites that was making music for the Lord. Now he's saying, Levites only, get your worship instruments, worship God, because you know what he requires. Like, he is putting stuff in place. And all of this is because Uzzah died. And again, I want to encourage you. Sometimes the discipline is to set you on the right path, because he knows if that discipline didn't happen, you would not be as fervent to find out what he really requires. And this is what sends David on this path of really putting the Levites and priests in place, which is important because it really is a blessing to us. We learn so much from what David puts in place. And literally, when we do things the right way, oftentimes it's coming out of this legacy that David has left for us. So to get in place, to do the stuff they're supposed to be doing, some of them are singing, some of them are playing instruments. Like, it goes into specific detail here in Chronicles of all the stuff that they do. Even the gatekeepers for the ark are there. And you will know in verse 24 that Obed-Edom was one of the gatekeepers for the ark, which is why God blessed his household, because that was actually his post. His post is to be a gatekeeper for the ark. That's who he is among the priests and Levites. And so when they took it to his house, the right person had it. You see what I mean? This is why his household started being blessed. And so just want to encourage you that when we're in position, God will do all types of stuff. He will do amazing, miraculous stuff when we are in position. So get into position. So then it says in verse 26, it says, since Adonai was helping the Levi'im, the Levites, who were carrying the ark of the covenant for Adonai, they sacrificed 7 young bulls and 7 rams. This is the burnt offerings for deliverance. Then the singers and the music leaders, all of them are wearing their linen garments. And David is wearing a linen ritual vest. We read that already, that David was wearing a ritual vest. And so bring up the ark of the covenant with the shofars and the trumpets and the cymbals and the lutes and the lyres. And it all comes up to the city of David. And the only thing they say about Michal is that she was watching from the window and held David in contempt. But it doesn't give us that description of the conversation that we see happening in 2 Samuel. Now, you also want to look at chapter 16, because we want to see the ministry that David does before the ark. It tells us again, of course, that he pitched a tent for it, and they brought it to that tent. He gives everybody this food, and he blesses everybody and sends them home. But then it tells us also here in 1 Chronicles 16 that David appoints certain Levites to serve and minister before the ark continues. So now that the ark is there, he's like, we're not just going to leave it here. You got to minister before the presence of God continually. So he puts people on post and rotates them so that there's worship always happening in front of the ark of the Lord, which is an amazing thing. Like, again, this is This is stuff that we see now. Like, things that we're doing now have come right out of these scriptures, where David is like, there should always be worship before the Lord. And I would really, really bet, because I know the way the Lord interacts with me, that David got a vision of heaven. I bet you when Uzzah died and David is crying out these psalms before the Lord, and he's like, Lord, we wrong, forgive us, forgive us, forgive us. I'll bet you the Lord gave him a vision of heaven. And when he looked into the heavenly realms, he saw that worship was continually happening before the throne of Yahweh. And because he saw that, now he tells these Levites, you need to be continually worshiping before the Ark of the Covenant. Like, I am just certain of it, that this is what happens. And it was because he was in such a down place when Uzzah died, and he was seeking God so fervently, that God gave him that vision. Because David was prophetic. David got all types of visions and revelations from the Lord. And we know that because his psalms are tremendously prophetic. And so I'm telling you, I am certain that David got a revelation from the Lord. And this is why he has these men stationed on posts or rotations, to make sure there's always worship happening before the presence of Yahweh, which is just an amazing, amazing thing, because he's, again, doing it like the model in heaven. Then we see that there's a song listed here from verses 8 through 36 that David gives them to worship in front of the throne. What I'm going to tell you is that it's actually 3 songs. It is Psalm 105, which you're going to read this week. It is Psalm 96, which you're going to read as well. And it's also verses 147 and 48 from Psalm 106, which we've already read. We've already read Psalm 106 in our rotation. But I'm not going to go over Psalms 105 and 96, but they're actually in the Bible reading calendar. After you read chapter 16, you're going to see Psalm 105, 96, and 106 as a part of this psalm he reads here, when he gives the Levites to minister before Yahweh. Then go and read Psalm 105 and Psalm 96 and Psalm 106. Particularly, again, it's verses 1 and 47 and 48, which we've already read. We've read 106 already. But in the Bible reading calendar, read 105 and 96, because you'll see that this is where these psalms come from, which is such an important revelation, because he is just speaking these beautiful things about how the Lord remembers his covenant forever. He brings his people through the enemies and tells them, touch not my prophets and touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. And he brought them out and brought them in, and the heavens should declare his glory. Like, it's an amazing, amazing revelation here that we see happening through this psalm that he gives the priest to minister. So then, of course, he leaves them before the ark to continually minister before the ark, and Obed-Edom and his sons, of course, the gatekeepers for the ark. And then we see the Cohen. He brings a high priest there to minister before the ark, but there's another high priest ministering before the tabernacle. So everything for the tabernacle is in one place in Gibeon, but then the Ark of the Covenant is now in the city of David, so now there's 2 high priests. There's a high priest that is before the tabernacle, and there's a high priest before the ark. And the high priest before the ark now has to do all the stuff David just said, make sure these men keep this continual worship before the presence of Yahweh. And so that's a very good question. I do want to answer your question. How do we have continual worship before the Lord? And it's an important question. There's 2 answers to that. When it comes to our priestly responsibilities in the earth, what the Lord requires is a rotation. He requires that priests are always on duty, that I have a certain time when I'm on duty, and you have a time, and another person has a time, another person has a time, and we've got these shifts where we're ministering before the Lord. And you'll see 24-hour houses of prayer have that, where people actually pray in shifts before the Lord. And then they do kind of a harp and bowl, which we talked about last week, where they're worshiping with music and they're praying. So there's prayer and there's music, and there's prayer and there's music. And they do it in shifts and rotations, like what David is establishing here. And you can do that in ministries as well, where you have these shifts where people are just ministering before the Lord in shifts, so that there's times where people can go and rest, and there's times where people can go to the sanctuary and worship, and you always got those times assigned so that the shifts are covered. But when it comes to each individual person, we can still have a continual worship before Yahweh, because we're constantly ministering to him. We're constantly allowing him to minister to us. And that comes from a sincere intimacy of prayer and fasting on a regular basis. When you do that, everything you do will allow you to be in a worshipful place before the Lord. And that's what we're supposed to do. If I'm living a lifestyle of fasting, which means I'm regularly fasting from something, and I'm reading the Bible and praying every day. I like to do it first thing in the morning, because that's what he requires of me, so that I start my day with prayer and Bible study, inquiring of him and interceding for other people. I start my day with like 2 hours of that, So he's in me, with me, guiding me throughout the whole day. So then no matter what's happening, whether I'm with my family, whether I'm doing work, whether I'm watching TV, it doesn't matter what I'm doing, the Lord is with me. And as he is with me, I am yet talking to him. I'm praying to him. I'm worshiping him. I'm ministering to him. So that every activity in my life is still including me worshiping him. And that is the life he's called us to. And that is the life where you'll have the discernment. You'll hear what he wants to have happen. You'll get the revelation. He'll tell you to go this way and not that way. Like that happens when we continually keep him before us. And the beautiful thing about that is that when we have the Holy Spirit with you in that type of way, you continue feeding that spirit, which is a worship throughout the day. The Lord will also reveal to you things that grieve him. Like things will happen and he'll be like, that's not for me. Get rid of that. And that's because his presence is there. And you'll feel it that his presence is there, and that's something that has just offended or grieved his spirit, and he will cause you to get rid of it and then come back to him and worship him some more. And that's a beautiful thing for God's people because it keeps us in the place that he wants us to be in. That is the place where the fruits of the spirit operate in us at all times. Where we don't have to say, well, Lord, give me some love right now. Give me some peace or some joy, some self-control right now. He's giving it to us continually because we're worshiping him continually, no matter what we're doing. And that, again, it comes from really seeking him with an intimacy every single day, living a sacrificial lifestyle, a lifestyle of fasting, a lifestyle of prayer and worship like all the time. When I'm doing that throughout the day, in my car, in my kitchen, I'm just worshiping him, singing his songs in the shower, like all the time. Even when I'm with other people who are listening to secular music or want to watch like, movies and stuff like that that don't really honor God, God is still with me, talking to me about it, ministering to me, and I'm ministering to him at the same time. And that's the place that we're supposed to be in because it allows us to be priests and people around us at any given moment, which means every choice we make is putting us in position that no matter what's happening around me, I can be a priest. I can do what, you would have me to do, Lord. And this is why, even though drinking is not a sin, the Lord has told me not to drink at all. And the reason he's told me that is because he says there's a scripture in the Torah that says the priest should not drink before they serve in ministry. So like if they're coming to the temple or the tabernacle to serve, they're not supposed to drink during that time. And he said to me, I want you to always be able to be a priest. I want you to always be able to do what I want you to do. So don't drink at all. Because if you drink at all, now you just removed yourself from the place where I want you to be the minister before me. And that's his instruction to me. I'm not saying that he's saying that to you. But what I am saying is do whatever he's telling you to do so you'll always be in that place of his presence. So there's not a time where now you're apart from him, but now you're with him. No, he wants us to be with him at all times and to take him with us and to go where he's going. And that is the way we continually minister. And so I hope that answers your question. Then also, we see here just the beautiful way that David is setting up all the priests and the instrumentalists, because they're Levites. Like everybody is in their post, so that he makes sure that this presence of Yahweh never leaves. He didn't want the presence of God to ever leave Jerusalem. He wanted God's presence to always be with him as he was leading his people. He wanted God's presence to always be with him as he was fighting Lord's battles. He always wanted the presence to be there. So now he put people in position and on post so they could do it. Amen. So then, again, I'm not going to read Psalm 105 or 96 because they're right here. But you should read them as you go through the Bible reading calendar. And now I'm going to take you to Revelation chapter 11, only verse 19. Verse 19 only. Because we read all the other verses of this chapter. But look at this. This is so important. After all that stuff we just read. Then the temple of God in heaven was opened, and the ark of the covenant was seen in his temple. And there were flashes of lightning, voices, peals of thunder, and earthquakes, and violent hail. And it's so interesting because I love the way that John uses the language ark of the covenant. The ark of the covenant is seen in heaven. And what is the ark of the covenant? It is the throne of God that we see in Revelation chapter 4 and 5. Because the ark of the covenant was God's throne. It's the mercy seat, and there were two cherubim here. And then when they put it in the temple, Solomon had two cherubim behind it. So that is 4 total cherubim. And when we see God's presence, his throne in heaven, in Revelation chapter 4, there are 4 cherubim around him. And then, of course, there's the sevenfold spirit of Yahweh, that's the menorah. And there's the fellowship of all of what God is doing in the heavenly realm, that's the bread. And there's the prayers going forth, there's the incense. Like all of these elements that are in the temple are in the heavens. They're all in the heavens. But the ark itself is the throne of God with the 4 cherubim around it. because they're the ones who carry his presence, which is what we see in Ezekiel chapter 1. These same 4 cherubim are carrying the presence of Yahweh. And that's the ark. And so when John talks about him seeing it from the heavenly realm, at this point, he connects it to the ark, which is the very thing we see David transporting in the scriptures that we just read. So I love this overlap. I love the way it connects. So we know that these are not dead worship articles. These are copies of the things in heaven. So now let's go to the next day. Giving God the worship he desires. So go with me to 2 Samuel chapter 7, which is going to correspond with 1 Chronicles 17. And what we see in both chapters here is that David is now in a palace that he built from the cedar wood from Hiram, the king of Tyre. And he goes, man, I'm living in a house of cedar, and God's presence is in a tent. That's not right. And he's repentant of it. His heart is hurt about this. And he goes, I need to build God a house. And Nathan says, do whatever the Lord tells you to do. He's with you. But then God comes to Nathan the prophet and says, tell David, that's not right. That he's not the one to build me a house. He's been a warrior. He shed much blood. But I'm going to build him a house. I'm going to bless him. I'm going to bless his household. I'm going to put his son from his own line on the throne. I'm never going to take the kingship away from him. I'm going to extend his kingdom forever. And his son is the one that's going to build me a house. And you see that it's almost the same language in 2 Samuel chapter 7 that you see in 1 Chronicles chapter 17, which is why I believe they probably got 1 Chronicles chapter 17 from 2 Samuel chapter 7, because it's almost the exact same language, where we go back and forth between those 2 chapters, which is why I want you to read them together, because you're really reading the same thing again. But there may be little subtle nuances that are different, but other than that, it's really the same information, which is such a blessing because it's such a beautiful confirmation of the fact that this conversation between David and Nathan and God did in fact happen, where the Lord promises really Messiah. That's what he's promising. He's promising Messiah to the Lord. And the reason this day is titled Giving God the Worship He Desires is because David wanted to give God a temple. God wanted David to give him a Messiah. That's what God wanted. And it's so beautiful because sometimes we think we know the worship God wants. Sometimes we think we know what he wants from our life, what type of sacrifice he wants from us. And though David does all the preparation for the temple, the most important thing that David does is build the house of Messiah, the king and the priest. We never see a king priest like David again. Solomon isn't even like David again. He continues what David starts. Solomon is like the Prince of Peace, the Sar Shalom, which is what Yeshua is, because Solomon's name, Shlomo, means shalom, and he comes into a kingdom at rest, and he's able to establish the temple because his kingdom is at peace and at rest. But he still doesn't operate like the priest in the kingdom like David does. Solomon only writes 1 psalm. He writes a whole bunch of books, like, he wrote Proverbs, which is recording the stuff David told him. He writes Ecclesiastes. He writes Song of Solomon, or a Song of Songs, depending on the way your Bible reads it. But he doesn't write the Psalms to God like David does. He doesn't worship God like David does, because David was really embodying the kingship and the priesthood, really preparing for the way of Messiah. And that was the fruit of David's life that God wanted. That was the worship that God desires. And so when David is told, you're not the one to build me a house, but I'm going to build a house for you, and I'm going to establish a dynasty, and your son is going to build my house, David worships him. He prays to God, and he's like, who am I that you even think this much of me? Thank you. And he blesses God, and he asks him, Lord, please fulfill exactly what you said. And you'll see that in both chapters, 2 Samuel 7 and 1 Chronicles 17. Then I want to take you to Psalm 29, because in it we're going to see more worship from David. In Psalm 29, let's see, I have titled it Give Adonai Glory. And David talks about giving God the glory that is due his name. And this is the type of beautiful worship that he gives God when he finds out that the Lord is going to bless his household forever, that he's going to bring Messiah through his line. And this, of course, not the language the Lord uses, but he tells him he's going to extend his kingship forever. And we know that's because the Messiah comes through his line. But he talks about this great power that the Lord has. He cracks the cedars of Lebanon, and those are the cedars that were used to build David's temple. David's temple is made of the cedars of Lebanon. And so the language he's using is so interesting, because what he is just pointing out is that nothing that he has done, nothing that David has done, compares in any way to God. Like, it's so beautiful. He talks about, all these different things that mean something to him. And God is in his temple. So it's like, I wanted to build you a temple here, you're in your temple up there, which is the very thing that we see that John saw in the verse that we just read the day before. And so it's just such a beautiful language and such a beautiful interaction where David talks about God being the king. David talks about God being the throne. After God has just said that I'm going to make you, David, king forever, David worships God as king. And that is just the very place God is bringing us to, because that's the worship the Lord desires. Where again, that great exchange, he blesses us, we bless him, he blesses us, we bless him, going back and forth with that worship. This is what David models for us, and that's the very thing that we should be doing. Now I want to take you to Psalm 8. And in Psalm 8, I have titled this one, "Oh Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth." And there's a song I used to sing when I was in the choir. Y'all know that song that actually comes right out of this song. But it's a beautiful, beautiful song, and it's so beautiful when it's sung in harmony and things like that. And I can hear it when I read the song. I can hear that song in my head. But it's so beautiful what David says here, how majestic God is, how majestic is his name, and how babes and infants, give him worship, and that God gives them strength and establishes them, and that God is in heavens and he looks down, on all the things he's created, and he's made humans a little lower than the angels and crowned us with glory. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful picture of this glory of God and how glorious his presence and his strength actually are. And so, just read this one as well, because we do want to just allow David to minister to us as we go forward in really learning how to come into this kingdom authority, because we're able to see very closely, some intimate details about how David came into his kingdom authority. Now we're going to go to the last day, the battle for victory. And this is important. This particular topic is important because most of us want to come into kingdom authority without a fight, but it doesn't come without a fight. It costs a lot. And it does always, it takes a fight every single day. And so this is what we see happening in 2 Samuel chapter 8. We see David's victories, but again, it is almost the same as 1 Chronicles 18. It's not exactly the same though. It's not like this last one was. It's not exactly the same. There is some stuff in 1 Chronicles 18 that we're not going to see in 2 Samuel chapter 8, but it is similar. There's a lot of similarities that we're going to see to those two chapters. So again, you want to read them together so that you're able to see the similarities. But there's some battles here that I want to point out and connect them to Psalm 60, because in Psalm 60, David talks about these battles more specifically. David attacks the Philistines and subdues them. It says that he defeated Moab and made them lie down on the ground, and he killed 2/3 of them. Then it talks about that his dominion was established all the way into as far as the Euphrates River, defeating Hadadezer and Rohab, the king of Zobah. He captures their people and disables the horses and the chariots, and puts garrisons in Aram, and God gave him victory everywhere that he went. And then we see that Toi, king of Hamath, realizes that Hadadezer has been defeated because he used to fight him. And he comes and brings David a tribute. David dedicates that whole tribute to God and puts it, among the things of the vase so that they can be used later to bless the Lord. Again, God gave David victory everywhere that he went. Like you can see, there's so many places. And then his sons were his advisors and operating like his priests. And then we see some of his leaders that were over his kingdom. Now, again, you're going to see pretty much the same thing here in 1 Chronicles chapter 18. It's pretty much the same situation where you're going to see a little bit more about Edom, where he stationed some garrisons in Edom, and then he killed some men. Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, his sister, killed 18,000 men from Edom in the valley of Sod, and David ministered justice for his people. And it's very similar language. But when you get to Psalm 60, in Psalm 60, you're going to realize, even though what we just read kept saying, God gave David victory everywhere he went. Adonai gave David victory everywhere he went. In Psalm 60, David is crying out to God. And this is so important because in Psalm 60, I titled it, God help us against our enemies. And this is what it says at the beginning. For the leader set to lily of testimony, a miktam of David for teaching about when he fought with Aram Naharaim and with Aram Tova, and Joab returned and killed 12,000 men from Edom in the Salt Valley. Now, he's talking about what we just read. But when you read this psalm, David asked, Lord, why have you rejected us? Why have you let us be crushed? Please revive us. The land is shaking. Your people are suffering hard times. We're staggering. But, to those who fear you because of the truth, you give a banner to rally around so that those who love you can be rescued. Save us with your right hand and answer us. So when you read this, you realize, okay, wait a minute. When I read it in 2 Samuel chapter 8 and 1 Chronicles 18, it was an easy victory. David went in there, he was victorious, boom, boom, boom. When I read David's psalm about this very same event, clearly there was some point where David was losing. He was losing, he was struggling, he thought they were going to be crushed. And he cried out to God through this psalm, which is what turns the tides. And that is so important because again, this 7th-day topic is the battle for victory. Oftentimes, what people see on the outside is God's people just winning and victorious, being blessed. People have no idea what the real fight looks like. And so when you compare 2 Samuel 8, 1 Chronicles 18 with Psalm 60, you realize that victory that sounds so simple in that one little sentence, God gave David victory everywhere he went, was not simple at all. It included a humbling of himself before God. It included them losing a little bit. He probably lost some men. It included him being afraid. It included him having to cry out to God and write a whole song just to entreat the favor of Yahweh, because at some point he felt like he didn't have God's favor. Like, this is a big deal. It's a big deal that we understand it this way, because that's not the way it looks when you read it in 2 Samuel 8 and 1 Chronicles 18. It does not seem like it's like this. It doesn't seem that it happened this way. It seemed like it was easy victory, but it was not an easy victory. And we've got to know that because we're going to end in Revelation chapter 12, where we see God doing some great things and God allowing his people to be victorious. But it's a bitter war. It's a bitter battle. The enemy is a formidable foe. And the only people who think he's not is people who've never been really in spiritual warfare. Anybody who thinks the enemy is not a serious foe just has never fought him. But if you've really been in warfare, you know that the enemy is just, he will pull no punches. He will hit below the belt. Like he will keep going and going until he thinks he's worn you out, and he can attack you when you're down. Like, if you've been in spiritual warfare, you understand that. And you understand that we cannot be victorious over the enemy without God. It's not something that just in our humanity we can do. It is only the presence of God, his glory, his power, his Holy Spirit, his grace, his intervention, his angelic help that allows us to be victorious over the enemy. Because it's essential that we get that, because we don't want to be arrogant and think, oh, well, if I just do things God wants me to do, if I just pray and I just worship, my life is just going to be beautiful because God is going to make me victorious. That's what it seems like in 2 Samuel chapter 8, 1 Chronicles 18. But Psalm 60 gives us a different picture. That's not how that works. There will be times when you feel like the enemy is kicking your butt all up and down the street. And I remember a season of my life where I was just telling my intercessors, I really need y'all to pray, because I feel like the enemy just kicking my butt all up and down the street. Like, he just beat me up. And I need y'all praying hard. And I remember that season where it was just painful, just every day. I didn't feel like I was being victorious. And other people on the outside would have seen victory, but it didn't feel like that to me, because it was just warfare, constantly warfare, personal attacks, hitting below the belt, attacks on my children. Like, it was just so much. And I was coming into that kingdom authority, but it was ugly. It was ugly, like David is describing in Psalm 60. And so when we get to Revelation 20, we see an ugly battle. We see a very serious battle, where had not God intervened, there would have been a loss for the kingdom. But God intervenes all the time, and we can be confident in that He's going to intervene on our behalf, just like He intervenes here in Revelation chapter 12. And so here in Revelation chapter 12, we see a woman clothed with the sun, with the feet, with the moon under her feet, and on her head is a crown of 12 stars. Now, this is literally like a constellation in the heavens, which a few years ago actually did exist. Like, it actually happened in the heavens this way. The moon was in a certain position, and then there was a woman who is the constellation of Virgo, and the sun was at the head of the constellation of Virgo, and the moon was at the feet And then there was 12 stars around the head. And it's not that we, believe in horoscopes or anything like that. This is about God showing us spiritual realities by what he's doing in nature. It's not for us to be reading our daily horoscope and trying to look at the stars to figure out if we should get married or not. That's not what this is about. But God does use everything around us to speak. And so literally we see these signs in the heavenly realm, but it's important for us to know what's happening in the spiritual realm. And that only God can reveal to us. Only the Lord reveals it, only his Holy Spirit reveals it. And so his Holy Spirit is revealing that there's a birthing that's happening. And the birthing is that the woman is giving birth to a son, and the enemy who's being thrown out of heaven and taking a third of the stars with him. This is when Satan incites a coup against God. He loses terribly. God casts him out of heaven down to earth, which is his punishment. I keep telling people that the enemy was sent to earth as a punishment because he doesn't have any dominion here. We have dominion here. He was sent to a place where he has no dominion. And because he's a trickster, he spent the last millennia, that's the plural, millennia. He spent the last few millennia trying to convince us to give our authority to him. Because he doesn't have any authority in the earth. We have the authority in the earth. The earth is a punishment for him because he's kicked out of the heavenly realms where he has authority. Or he had authority because we're stripped of that authority. So he's kicked down to earth with the 30 angels, which means the 30 angels revolted with him and now became demons. Okay, so this is what happened. They're sent down to earth. When he comes to earth, he sees that the child is about to be born. And he stands in front of the woman who's giving birth so she can devour the child as soon as he's born. Of course, this is Messiah being birthed out of Israel, which is very, very important because Eve, that first woman we see in Genesis chapter 3, it tells us when she's cursed, but then the revelation of the curse says that her seed will bruise the head of the serpent. This is why the serpent, who is now a dragon, is saying, I got to get this seed. I got to get this child that's going to come from this woman because I can't allow it to strike my head, to kill me. And so I got to come after it. And so he tries to kill the son. Of course, that's Yeshua. He tries to kill him. He tries to make sure he's crucified, but doesn't realize that's actually the plan of God. He tries it. Very important. But this male child is the one who's going to rule the nations with the staff of iron. That's Messiah. You see what I'm saying? That is the scripture that's being fulfilled. That comes directly out of Psalm 2, verses 8 and 9. We've read that. I believe we read it. Yeah, we read it. And so what becomes so important is that God himself snatches the child, brings him to the throne, because Yeshua goes up to heaven, right? And he's at the right hand of the Father. And then the woman goes into the desert to a place prepared for her. Israel goes into exile for how many years has that been? Like 2,000 years on that. And doesn't come back to the land until May 14th, 1948. And it's important because we see the enemy still attacking her offspring. And so we see Israel being attacked. We see believers who are grafted into Israel, according to Romans chapter 11, also being attacked. Because the enemy is like, look, they're trying to birth something in the earth that is going to rival me. And it's going to allow this son of man, Messiah, to be king who's going to strike my head. And so I've got to get rid of him, them, everything I can get rid of. So he's after Israel. He's after body believers. He's after Yeshua, who can't touch, who's in heaven realms now. But he's trying to get rid of everything he can get rid of. And so we see Michael, or Michael, the archangel, one of the four that sits around the throne of Yahweh in the heavenly realm, Enoch. He fights the dragon and pushes the dragon and his demons back, okay? And they're not strong enough. And so it's very important when they're thrown down, okay? However, we see a loud voice proclaiming that now have come God's glory, power, kingship, and the authority of the Messiah, because the accuser of brethren has been thrown down. But it's important because those who have defeated the enemy have done so because of the blood of the Lamb. It's because of Yeshua that the enemy is able to be defeated. Remember, Yeshua told the disciples, he said, I see Satan falling like lightning out of heaven. And this is so important because, of course, the first time Satan was kicked out of heaven, that happened near the beginning of time, or beginning of earthly linear time. So he's cast down to the earth and he becomes a serpent in the garden. But there's another time when he's cast out of heaven. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Remember when we read Job, and it says that the angels presented themselves before Yahweh in heaven, and Satan presented himself too. So in Job, though this is after Satan had been cast down to earth as a punishment, he's still presenting himself before God in the book of Job. And this is where he's accusing Job, because Satan means accuser. So he's accusing Job before God in heaven. And then God, of course, has a conversation with him, and Job goes through his trials, and then he ends out. However, when Yeshua came, Satan is no longer even able to go into the heavenly realms to present himself before the Father to accuse anybody anymore. Because Yeshua atoned for all sin, there's no more accusation. Satan can no longer come before God to accuse us. This is why when Yeshua says to the disciples, I saw Satan fall out of heaven like lightning, he's talking about now the accuser can't even go back to accuse. His ability to go back to the heavenly realms to accuse has now been revoked. Why? Because when Yeshua goes into the heavenly realms after his resurrection, it presents his own blood, as we see in Revelation chapter 5, cleanses the heavenly realms of the sin that Satan committed in heaven. So now heaven is completely cleansed and atoned for, so Satan can never come back into the heavenly realm to ever accuse us before God again. Ever. Because Yeshua is sitting at the right hand of the Father making intercession for us according to Romans chapter 8. And so it's important that we get that there was the two castings of Satan down. The first casting was that you go to earth, you can't be an angel anymore. But the second casting is you can't even come back up here to accuse anymore. Now the accusation is over. And this is why receiving salvation inside Yeshua is so important, because we don't even understand all of the benefits that have come from the Lord. Because before that, Satan was accusing us day and night before the Lord. Now he's not even able to do that anymore, which is such a beautiful thing, which is why the heavens are rejoicing. But they tell us, the land and the sea, woe to you, in verse 12, because Satan's come down to you. And he's angry because he knows his time is short. And so he has been, the last 2,000 years since Yeshua's resurrection, he has been on a rampage, doing all types of stuff and being deceptive about it, even doing things in God's name, and even doing things in Jesus' name, to try to get people to come to him, serve and worship him, and be angry with God. Like it's crazy the tactics and the schemes that he has come up with to attack the people of God and to attack Yeshua himself. But he's absolutely done it. Even the name change, all of that stuff from Yeshua to Jesus and changing the calendar, all of that was the enemy. It was all very strategic moves of the enemy to try to attack Yeshua and all of the children of the woman. Which is what he's been trying to do for 2,000 years, because he knows his time is short. It's important that we get that. And so now, of course, he's pursuing the woman. She gets two wings to fly away, so he's not able to completely devour her. So then he spews out a flood to try to go after her, and he fights the rest of her children. And that's the very thing I was just telling you guys about in verse 17. And so it's important that we get that we will have to battle for victory, because the enemy is always trying to fight us now here in the earth realm, because he can no longer accuse us before the Father. So he's got schemes and plans and these twisted little manipulations to try to get us out of our position so we would turn away from God and actually be serving Satan and not even realize it. Very important we understand it, because we have got to battle for victory. And our battle is going to look much like Psalm 60 and a lot less like 2 Samuel chapter 8 or 1 Chronicles 18. Yes, we will get victory. God will give us victory everywhere we go, but we're going to have to cry out to him. We're going to have to experience some things that feel like loss, and then allow him to bring us back and restore us. So I hope that gives you some clarity, so that you will stay the course and not believe that old doctrine, that people often teach is really a demonic doctrine, that we're not supposed to experience anything unpleasant. Nothing like that's supposed to happen to us. Because if it does, that means we're doing something wrong. See, that comes from condemnation, comes from the enemy trying to get us to turn away from God when things are not pleasant. God did not promise us pleasantries. He promised us an end-time victory. And that's what we're believing him for, and that's what we continue to fight for. So now that we've gone through all those scriptures, this is the reflection for this week. What scripture did you read this week that revealed an essential lesson about kingdom authority that God is teaching you in this season? There's some things we got to learn, and some of those things we only learn them in practice. We don't learn them just from reading the scripture. We got to actually be in warfare and coming into our kingdom authority to learn certain lessons. And so keep your eyes open. Let God show you what he's trying to teach you, so that you can learn everything you need to know, and that you can be victorious as you come into your kingdom authority and we prepare for the return of our King. I pray that blessed you. I do hope that you will join us for service tomorrow. We have service at 3 p.m. online, a Shabbat temple service that I know is going to bless you. For those of you who are in the Priesthood Academy, we'll actually be doing a lesson on kingdom authority in the Priesthood Academy at 1 p.m. And so those who are part of the Priesthood Academy, you'll get that link as well, so that you can join us at 1 p.m. But for everyone else, our temple services at 3 p.m. are open to all. If you don't know the link because you're not on our email list, because I'm going to send that out, and I've been sending it out a week, just email me at info@truthandspirit.org to request the link for our online Shabbat service tomorrow, and I will send it to you. Again, I pray that bless you, and I look forward to worshiping with you very soon.